We have on the agenda, I'm going to call it to order and let you know that we have a closed session. We will be back out, I promise you, from you-know-what to high water, that we'll be back out at 11. So if you want to stay here and wait, please do. Enjoy the cooling, refreshing atmosphere. Talk among yourselves, and we will see you back here at 11. If you're not here, that's fine, but if we will be. So we want to see you all. Thank you.
What's that? Hi, Peggy.
Hi. We're going into closed session.
Right. How come all these people here? Why are these people there?
Well, they're here to see you, man.
They're to see you. Oh, right.
Okay, let's go, everybody.
You can exit. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right.
You know, my wife took off with all my paperwork and my laptop and everything.
One, two, we got everybody here. So.
Oh, I thought it was on here.
Okay, it's being a little bit after 7 minutes late. My apology to all. We're going to call the meeting to order. We just came out of closed session, so some people are doing other things for a moment, but they will be back. So I am going to open this up to call the meeting to order. I am going to ask that we all pledge allegiance to the flag, and I'd like to lead that. Repeat with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain seated. Please remain standing for just 1 minute. I'd like to ask for divine guidance here for all of us. I know there's anger. I know there's misunderstandings. I know that we do not know everything, and we do not have every single answer. But we are going to treat each other with respect and dignity, understanding you have concerns and questions. We have the same. So, Lord, I ask you to bless us all and give us wisdom and guidance. Thank you. Please be seated.
Amen. In your holy name.
In anybody's name. Okay, we are going to go into public comments.
Madam Chair, may I ask if there's a report from the closed session on any actions taken by the board?
We don't have it yet. You will see it shortly. Okay?
Wait.
I can give a report, Peggy.
Well, but you're going to give it to us when we come to that item, aren't you? Or you want to do it now? No.
This is just to explain that we came out of closed session.
All right.
And there was one item. It's set forth in the agenda. No direction was given to staff. No final action was taken.
Okay. Now, we will do public comment. Time is reserved for the public to address the board about matters not on the agenda. So no action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Please identify yourself when you speak, please. Thank you.
Judy Decker. As you know, I have attended all the meetings. I also attended the meeting last night. I would like to say to you that this community has many highly educated and experienced people who are involved with this water situation. Many of them have come up month after month and given you suggestions. It is not obvious that you have taken those suggestions, studied them, and are going to use them. I strongly suggest that while you are forced to listen to us because you're there and we're here, that you take these suggestions, study them, and use them. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Penelope Lapome. I'm a resident of Ridgecrest. I have several points. There have been comments at various meetings, but I've never heard any responses to the comments. I've never heard, people will ask questions, but I've never heard any answers. I think that the board needs to do a much better job of outreach and explain the need for all these studies that we're doing. I think that's why people are requesting a finance committee to really question whether we need to be spending all the money that we seem to be spending on studies. We've had a number of studies over the years in the Valley, and I'm not sure that all these studies are required for a plan. The other thing is that there have been some mutterings about eliminating evaporative coolers, but I haven't heard anything about eliminating pools. How much water do pools use? How often do they need to be drained? How many pools are there in the Indian Wells Valley? I haven't heard a word. It seems to me that we need evaporative coolers more than we need swimming pools. I'm also concerned that there seems to be about 15 months before the plan has to be submitted, and I'm not even sure we've agreed on what is meant by sustainability. I've said before, for me, sustainability means the recharge equals the amount we're pumping out. So how do we address that discrepancy? And I have not heard anything significant on how that is going to be addressed. Those are my concerns right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Harold Manis, a private well owner, domestic well. Now, I sent a suggestion in a couple weeks ago, and I'm suggesting that since you were going to give the agriculture in the valley a flat fee of $35 an acre foot, while everyone else, including the Indian Wells Valley Water District, is on a tiered system. There are some people in the valley that might have a bill of, say, $100 during their 9 months of the year, and during the summer it goes up to $500. It's a matter of that the tiering is what is going to be really most likely to have to be used to slow down the water consumption in the valley. I understand that our replenishment is 5,000 to 7,000 acre feet per year. And the consumption, if we take the valley, or say Ridgecrest as 25,000 people with an average of 4 people per family, that's about 6,000 domestic well equivalent. If they using by statistics, I guess, or your Todd data from his 2014 reports, that the average in the valley is about 7/10 of an acre foot for domestic use. 7/10 of an acre foot per year. Okay? And if we take out of coming out with an average, let's say for Ridgecrest of 24,000 people, divide it by 4, that's 6,000 times 0.7 acre feet per year. And if we add 1,000 domestic wells, which is the average on the Todd, and if they're using an average of a 0.7 acre foot per year, that'll come out with we'll have 7,000 times 0.7 is about 4,900 acre feet per year for domestic use. We'll say 5,000. Okay. Now the agriculture is using about 5 times that or more. They're using 26,000 acre feet per year. The base has already cut theirs from what it was to 47%, I believe. And you can verify that if it.
53 right now.
Oh, reduction. Yeah, I meant to say down to 47% of what it was. Yeah. And everyone else is down to the domestic uses for pure existence, gentlemen and ladies. That's what they need to go. Now, if the agriculture and the rest of them are making a profit in extracting this water. Now, the water district uses a tiered system. PG&E uses a tiered system. SCE uses a tiered system. Why would you let them get by with a flat $35 per acre foot? They're making a profit. Whoops, excuse me. Is that my 3 minutes?
Just please wind it up as quickly as you can, please.
Okay. Anyway, I recommended a tiered system, and I recommend it now that you should start that. Instead of just worrying about adding $24,500, if you took all the 1,000 domestic well owners that are drawing about a 7/10 of an acre foot and tried to charge them for it at, what was your price per acre foot? Oh, $35. You'd get $24.50 from each of these, and it seems like you're more interested in that, looking at your...
Please wind it up, Harold, as quickly
yeah,
as you
I'm going to
can.
wind it up. That's it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir. No disrespect. Thank you.
Don Sadiba, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
I can't hear you.
Hello?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I'll put it in my mouth. Don Sadiba, Indian Wells Valley Water District. I just needed to make an announcement since we have such a big audience here. One of the studies that is underway is the Stanford Groundwater Architecture Project, and that involves aerial geophysical surveys of 3 basins, and the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Basin was one of the 3 basins that was selected. So in October of last year, and maybe many of you were aware of this, there was a company called SkyTem that actually flew over much of the basin and collected geophysical data. That data has been interpreted, and this afternoon at 3 o'clock here in council chambers, it will be presented for review and comments. We have invited the Technical Advisory Committee, the Policy Advisory Committee, the board, Stetson Engineering, any members of the public to look at the interpretation of that data and give us feedback. We'll also provide a high-level overview of the groundwater feasibility, brackish groundwater feasibility study, which has received a $1,084,000 grant from the Department of Water Resources. Give an overview of that and the Stanford project and how all these mesh. So if you're available and like to be here at 3 o'clock, please come by, and we'd be glad to share the interpretation of that data. It was collected in October of last year, and we've had a lot of people asking where's the data and what's been done with it. So we're about to unveil it this afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Eric Bankson, and I'm a lousy public speaker, but I just wanted to air my story a little bit. I've been living in South China Lake Acres for a while, and that's 1977. I was a de minimis water user ever since. During the past 40 years, I spent well over $50,000 maintaining and keeping a well and deepening a well and going through all of the stuff that you got to do to have the advantage of having your own water source. Ever since Dr. Pierre Saint-Amand revealed his water studies, I've understood that our valley is an overdraft, and that's a long time ago that he said that. Our well driller kept me informed on the water table that was dropping, first 6 inches a year, then 1 foot a year, then in the 1990s almost 2 foot a year, and that was when Indian Wells Valley Water District put their well number 31 less than a block away from my house, and that was in the cone of influence. Today, our well is at 400 feet, and the table is still dropping at 2 foot per year. My resources for information has been people like Judy and Don Decker. They're our watchdogs, and I think that as far as the Domestic Well Owners Association, everybody ought to kind of give them a round of applause for what they've done and organized us private well owners and folks that are hitting the problem of low water and water table drift. Aaron Kirschman, bless his heart, he kept us informed on what the well number 31 affecting our water table was and what the future was about for us. I believe all of us that all of us need to conserve water, and I believe that, as Judy Decker has stated many times, is we need to have experts, and we need to know who those experts are, and we need to define an organization that we're going to be having running this instead of this kind of drifty type of an attitude. And we need to seek methods of importing water. That's probably the only way to fill up the bowl again. I also strongly believe that Indian Wells Valley lost its opportunity to be a farming community with the Mulholland Project a century ago. So thanks for hearing me. Thanks.
Thank you for speaking. Thank you.
My name is Myron King. I live at the north end of Brown Road, about a mile and a half short of Pearsonville. We have a well out there that was put in when we moved up here over 40 years ago. The water level has been dropping 1 foot per year for the last 40 years. I've had to replace a 21-foot length of pipe twice. Just recently, we had a problem with the well, and the cast iron casing that they put in back then was rusted and falling apart, and had to have the entire thing relined with a plastic pipe and with a sand filter in between. The thing that impresses me is with all of this bureaucracy going on here and words and everything flowing, nothing yet have I seen that addresses the real problem. And the problem is that no matter how large the bucket you have, if you continue to take water out and you don't put any back in, it will run dry. And until you address that, the rest of this is just bureaucracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Myron.
Yes, my name is Stuart Field. I'm a private well owner just north of Inyakern. And I understand that, I believe that all of us here think that we're in overdraft, which means that we're taking more water out than is coming in. There are only two solutions that I know of, which do not include chasing bylaws and approval to audit your own minutes of meetings and everything else, which has been going on for about 3 years that I know of now. But there's only two ways to solve this. You got to sharply reduce pumping or significantly import a hell of a lot of water from sources that are surplus, have water surplus to their needs. Now, it doesn't take too much looking around to say that that's pretty rare in California. All right, now, the bottom line with this, that's the problem you've got right now. You need to cut back on the pumping or import water. Now, when you finally get through with this GSP, you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money, and you're going to be exactly at the same spot. There's not going to be a change. You have to quit pumping or import water. Now, what you're going to gain out of the GSP, I have no idea. I've looked at the poem, and I can't find almost anything that addresses or a commitment to one of these two solutions. Quit pumping so much or import the water. I don't see the GSA is committed to either one of these. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take to get a commitment, but we're running out of water. My well has dropped over 20 feet since we installed it. And it is dropping close to 2 feet a year, and I've measured a bunch of other wells. It's not just my well.
Thank you, sir.
Sophia Merck. I agree with all the speakers that were up here, so I'm not going to rehash it all. But I would like to bring up some extra information. I went to a Mojave Water Agency meeting not too long ago, and they brought up San Bernardino's groundwater pumping, and they have some new statutes out. Maybe Indian Wells Valley and Kern County ought to look at some of this, especially the Kona Depression. When you put a well right next to another well, you're going to have similar problems that we've had in this area. So please look at San Bernardino's. They've done a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay, thank you all. We appreciate it. We are now going into our presentation. And who has that, please? Who is doing the presentation?
This is the USGS on the line.
Perfect. That's who we're waiting for.
Can't see you.
Oh, do we have my presentation up on the screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, hi. I'm just gonna ask you to push forward the slides one by one as I go. That way we won't have a lag. Does that work?
Staff, is that
Yes, that
appropriate?
works.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to report today on our effort to use an independent method to estimate natural recharge in Indian Wells Valley. This is our final progress report. We've completed the study and are wrapping up our final documentation right now. Next slide, please. To remind everybody of the objectives of this study, it was to locally calibrate our water balance that we've developed with our newly revised basin characterization model in the Indian Wells Valley to estimate natural recharge by constraining all components of the water balance. We have intended to provide validation from multiple sources to increase confidence in the estimates, evaluate the historical and future patterns of natural recharge and evaporative demand in the valley. Next slide, please. This is an updated version of what we saw in the last presentation, showing long-term precipitation in blue and recharge, natural recharge in orange. This is annual. The long-term mean is considered 1981 through 2010, is shown there. And the point here is that recharge doesn't happen every year, and some years there's a lot of it. However, the long-term mean, when you average it, shows you different numbers, and depending on what period of record you choose, you're going to get different values. So the recent mean from 2000 to 2013 is lower than the average annual historical mean. Next slide, please. I point out the difference in which values you use because all of these numbers, the far right column, is the total natural recharge estimated over a very long period of time by a whole number of researchers. The numbers all vary a little bit. Once we got into, past some of the very large numbers and started getting a lot more data into it, the numbers vary, but they're within pretty much a ballpark of about 7,000 to 9,000 acre-feet per year. Our current number that we've estimated for the historical mean is 8680 acre-feet per year, and the more recent mean is 5976 acre-feet. This is the way we do this allows us to spatially distribute it across the region. If you look at the next slide, please. This is showing us the different subbasins that we've identified in the region and how the mean recharge in acre-feet, the far right column, differs amongst these different regions. So you have the most recharge coming from the Sierra Nevada mountains on the west. Second, you have a lot of recharge we've estimated coming into the volcanics, which are on the edge of the valley by the Coso Range. The reason for that is there's very little vegetation there, and so you don't have very much evapotranspiration, so you have an opportunity for more recharge. And lastly, there's a large volume we estimate of recharge in Rose Valley, but we don't know how much of that gets into Indian Wells Valley, so we are not reporting that as the total for Indian Wells Valley. But we are providing a value for it. Next slide, please. These are some final calibration results to show you how we have constrained our plant water use on the basis of remotely sensed estimates for all of the species, the vegetation types in the valley, and we've done a very good job of constraining this. For most of the species, some of them actually use water on a less than a monthly basis. For example, desert scrub, which is the box in the center, when you have summer storms or anything like that, the desert will come alive and use the water and then go back to being quiescent. And so we actually, the measured data that comes from remotely sensed data at a monthly time step actually underestimates it in comparison to what we do in some of those. But for the most part, we've done a very good job. I'd like to highlight the last graph on the bottom, which is the barren. This is something that we've worked with in a more rigorous manner because we wanted to make sure that we could produce the ponding that occurs on the playas, which are barren of vegetation for the most part. And so we've done a pretty good job constraining that, and as a result have been able to come up with reasonable estimates of matching the ponding, anecdotal ponding that occurs on the playa. So next slide, please. So this is a map of the average annual recharge shown. You can see that the volcanics are highlighted there as having between 10 and about 40 millimeters per year of recharge. You also see a little bit of recharge shown in the center of the valley. This is different from any of the other studies that have done. None of the other studies show any recharge in the middle of the valley, but we have a few places where it does, and that's likely a result of the vegetation species using very little water and allowing for individual storms to get a little bit of recharge. Obviously, most of the recharge is coming from the Sierra Nevada. Okay, next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce one more concept here that we haven't talked about. This is called climatic water deficit. It's the annual evaporative demand that exceeds available water, which is potential minus actual evapotranspiration. The graph shown is a calendar year from January through December of average conditions. The vertical axis is millimeters of water. So if we have precipitation as supply, as precipitation declines and actual evapotranspiration rises and vegetation use the water that's in the soil. As the water in the soil goes away and we don't have any more supply, you start to accumulate deficit over the water year. That deficit is correlated to irrigation demand. That is what the irrigation is needed in order to supply the crops with the water that they need to maintain potential evaporative performance. This integrates climate, energy loading, drainage, and available soil moisture, and generally increases with all future climate scenarios. Today I'm going to be showing you some of that. So my point in showing climatic water deficit is that it is relevant to potential changes in irrigation demand in the future. This is next slide, please. This is a map of the average annual historical climatic water deficit. The valley floor is very high in deficit, and the surrounding mountains are lower in deficit. You can see those numbers are in millimeters per year. Okay, if we go to the next slide, this is an introduction of how we chose our future climate models. The horizontal axis is the projected change in average air temperature. It goes from 1 degree to 6 degrees on that axis. And the vertical axis is projected precipitation change in percent. You can see that the zero change is toward the bottom. There's in this particular case, there's more increases in precipitation projected by all of these different models than there is declines. So all of these models are equally likely to occur. So the ones that are in green dots are using an emissions scenario that assumes that we have global compliance with all of our goals. The red ones are the current status of how we're moving forward with our emissions control globally. These models have been downscaled specifically to the Indian Wells Valley location so that we have a little bit more spatial resolution. If we go to the next slide, we chose to pick 3 models that we were going to investigate. One is a wet model, so we're looking at extremes so that there is actually the opportunity to look at the range of possible futures for Indian Wells Valley. So we have a wet model, these are all warm, a dry model on the bottom, and then a middle-of-the-road model in the middle. So we're going to report on all 3 of those. Next slide, please. These are those 3 models. The top one is the hot, wet one. The middle one is warm, moderately wet, and the bottom one is the hot, dry one. This is going from 1981, the historical record, through the end of the century. Air temperature is on the right, and that's the orange graphs for each one of these. Blue is recharge, or it's precipitation, is precipitation for each of these. And I show the vertical dotted line, which shows historicals to the left and futures to the right. And you can see that air temperature rises consistently. There's model consensus for all of these that air temperature is rising in the future. And for the most part, we're getting increases. While some of the models indicate projections that are rising in precipitation, the bottom one is generally declining in precipitation, but all of them are more variable. So there are more high precipitation years and more low precipitation years in the future than there have been in the past. Next slide, please. This is the projected change in climate in numerical format. This is precipitation for the 3 models and air temperature for the 3 models. The historical mean and standard deviation are shown for precipitation. It's about 180 millimeters per year with a pretty good standard deviation. The percent change is shown for 30-year periods in comparison to the historical period below, and you can see that there is an increase in mid-century for all of them in precipitation, and for 2 of them by end of century, one of the models has a decline. All of the standard deviations go up by end of century. If you look at air temperature rises by end of century by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. And the standard deviation isn't very much different. If we go to the next slide, I can show you a spatial result of that. This is the moderate, the middle-of-the-road model, and the graphic on the left is mislabeled. Oh, no, it's not. It's percent change in recharge mid-century in comparison to the historical record. So you see increases. The blues, yellow and green and blue, are all increases in recharge projected by the middle-of-the-road model by mid-century. So there are a couple of locations where you can see some oranges, which are declines, but for the most part, the model is projecting increases in precipitation. By end of century, the increases aren't quite as big in some of the locations in the Sierra Nevada, but for the most part, you're seeing increases in recharge. If you go to the next slide, this is the future projected climatic water deficit for that middle-of-the-road model. And we have the similar color scheme here where now we get the greens, the yellows, and oranges are increases in deficit. So that is more irrigation demand. However, you'll look at the scale and it only goes up to 6%. So in a location where you don't have a lot of water to start with, the deficit doesn't go up very much. Even by end of century, it's only about 6%. So that's good news. Go to the next slide, please. This slide is in the same format as the previous table, showing recharge in acre-feet per year for the 3 models and climatic water deficit in millimeters per year for those 3 models. Historical values are shown there. There's our 8680 recharge number with a very large, almost equivalent standard deviation, so indicating that their recharge is variable with climate, very variable with climate. And the percent change from the historical by mid-century showing an increase for all three models by mid-century. Also a very large increase in standard deviation. By end of century, we're seeing a very large increase, 138% for the wet model, and a decline of about 28% for the dry model. And again, big increase in variability. That increase of variability is something that should be considered when thinking about management strategies, because it's the opportunity of having some kind of capture, because you are still going to have more bigger wet years, even though you're going to have drier years as well. Water deficit, again, is going up about 4% mid-century, 6 to up to 9% end of century, and the standard deviation actually goes down a little bit. So that's pretty. Actually, these future results for California, these are a little different from many of the other models. Many of the models in other places in California have much more variability with declines in recharge for many of the models. Indian Wells Valley actually has been a little bit unique. We've been surprised with these results. So next slide, please. So final recharge estimates for the valley from local calibration to optimize the water balance have similar values as the recent results. So this provides a general consensus for long-term averages using a whole suite of different approaches to estimating recharge. The spatial distribution of natural recharge is a function of climate, geology, soil storage, and vegetation type. Most of the recharge comes from the Sierra Nevada and the Argus Range and volcanics. 3 global climate models for future climate analysis were selected: a hot and wet one, hot with moderate precipitation, and a hot and dry model. Next slide, please. The models show an increase in the climatic water deficit through the end of the century. They all agree because all models to date show an increase in air temperature. It's about 6% for the hottest scenario, suggesting that increases in irrigation demand will not increase much above those of today. Changes in projected recharge among models show a large degree of variability as a result of a lack of model consensus on precipitation, with increases in recharge through mid-century for all models and reductions by the end of century only for the hot-dry model. Increases in the annual variability of recharge occur for all models for all time periods in comparison to historical variability. And last slide is our progress to date is that we have completed the analyses on the study. We've looked at 3 future climate projections. We have completed a USGS data release that is currently undergoing review that should be released so that public access to the data will be available shortly. We're in the middle of putting together a journal article that will document all the methodology and all of the results. It's being prepared. It should be complete and submitted to a journal and then available for cooperator comment by the end of September. Once published, the documentation will all be available to the public. Thank you. My last slide. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Okay, let's open it up to the board and staff. Any questions? Comments? Okay, I'll ask the public if there are.
Hello, I'm Don Decker. I'm a member of the TAC. At the last presentation that you guys made, I asked you a critical question, which is, does the surface water that you're accounting for here relate directly to groundwater? And you responded with an answer of no. Are you still of that opinion?
Yes. This water, the water that we're estimating, these values we're estimating, is the average annual natural recharge that gets below the plant roots. It will move downward through a very deep unsaturated zone slowly until it reaches the groundwater. It is important to note that it is spatially distributed across the valley, and it does occur episodically. So there are going to be places in the valley that have more recharge, increasing the actual groundwater aquifer than other places in the valley, and that it doesn't occur every year. The water that is currently being pumped is likely very old. I think that someone last time came up with age numbers that confirmed this.
Yes, that was
and
me.
That's going to also, that was you.
Yes, it was.
Well then, okay. So that's confirming the notion that the water at the surface that gets below the plant roots that has the potential to move downward to the groundwater is currently what we're estimating is not going to get to the groundwater for a number of years.
That water is 24,000 years BP. It's actually not local water, it's Owens Valley water. It's connected directly with glacial melt.
Okay.
So, in fact, there is no evidence of any degree of modern day recharge. And your supposition that there is surface water precipitation reaching the groundwater in the central part of the valley has no detectable basis. It's theoretical.
I am not saying that it reaches the groundwater in any kind of short-term framework. I am only saying that this is natural recharge that makes it below plant roots and below the zone of evapotranspiration. That provides an opportunity for it to move downward.
Are you planning on presenting this study to the TAC for technical comment?
I have not made that kind of arrangement. I was not asked to do so, but I would be willing to do so if asked.
This is obviously not the forum for a technical discussion, and I think you would benefit greatly by the insight that those of us who actually understand this basin really well, and I'm not trying to be brash in saying that, I think you would benefit greatly from a discussion with us. The comments that I made earlier are really the issues that we all face here. Surface water is minimal and has been in the recent past. It simply doesn't have a real bearing on the problems that we face with sustainability. We are mining water here. It's ancient water, not just old water. And the so-called recharge that's just surface water is not a significant factor. As a matter of fact, a good bit of the desert here is dying. The plants that are really pretty much desert adapted are struggling with our current rainfall.
Don, could I ask that we make the recommendation to the TAC to invite her to discuss this with the TAC, and that way you can conclude and continue that discussion at that point in time?
That is perfectly fine, and I would appreciate that you would take that effort to invite her to the TAC.
All right.
We look forward, I would say, to a healthy discussion. I realize this is not the place for such a...
Who's going to pay for that?
That's what we're going to talk about.
Thank
We need to figure out how that's going to happen.
Well,
but let us see what we can do.
Well, there are many areas where small amounts of money could make big differences.
I got you. We understand. But without knowing what the cost is, it doesn't matter. how much it is until we determine that, please. Okay, next, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Will Austin, private well owner in Inyakern. I was curious about this water table going up and down. If I'm not mistaken, I think water runs downhill. And Hawley Reservoir down to Cantil, I would like to know if the LA Water and Power has anything to do with this, because they pumped Owens Valley dry. They're working on Hawley now, and then they took the Cantil aquifer and put solar over it so they can run it dry. And I'm just wondering why the people here in Kern County have to take care of the people in LA when they got a 1,000-mile coastline they can build desalination plants. It seems like everything out of here is going to LA.
Thank you, sir. We will ask and see if we can get some answers for you.
Well, I
Thank
think
you.
they got their fingerprints all over it.
Thank you very much.
Some of the other comments here reminded me. I've been told, and I have no knowledge in geology, but I've been told that there are
Myron,
at least
for the record, would you identify it so we
Oh,
come
I'm
back?
Myron King. I live
Thank
out
you.
the north end of Brown Road.
I know. I just wanted it on the tape.
Okay. I've been told that there are two levels of water. My well is down around 300 feet. But the pistachio farmers have just drilled a well here in the last year, about a quarter of a mile from me, and they went down 820 feet. And so I've been told that there are actually two levels of water down below, one around 300 and the other one down 700 or 800. So perhaps someone here could comment on that. I don't have the knowledge on it. But again, the study on the groundwater from rain, this sort of thing, is totally immaterial, has nothing to do with the water level 300 feet down. It's a non-subject.
Thank you. Could you address that for us? How your conclusions differ or augment what we understand about the groundwater recharge and what we're getting? Can you address that? I know it was a very simplistic question, but can you answer in a simple manner?
Maybe.
Okay.
There's water that recharges the valley. Granted, the water that is being pulled up from depths is very old. I understand that. But when they develop groundwater models, and our results are used very often to provide boundary conditions, time series boundary conditions of estimates of recharge. Most of those results are on the very perimeter of the valley. It allows the groundwater models to be calibrated realistically as they try to match wells with pumpage and everything. They include evapotranspiration and all of those notions, but they do require some estimate of natural recharge to the boundaries of their model in order to calibrate them. We have been working with Desert Research Institute, who's recently updated the model for Indian Wells Valley, and they're incorporating this data in there. It allows them, while some of this water may not get all the way to depth, most of it probably doesn't get all the way to depth where people are pumping, but there is water in the unsaturated zone. This water replenishes some of that water, which may or may not move to depth. And that's what groundwater models are for. They're the ones that have all those layers where you have different layers of available water in the subsurface at depth. So this is something that's being used to help those models constrain their results of what's happening in the hydrogeologic portion of the valley, the deep portion.
Thank you very much. A not so simple answer to a simple question, but thank you. You gave us what we asked for. Is there any other discussion? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And could you let staff know what the cost would be if you could do this same discussion with the TAC committee, please?
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is the consent calendar. Approval of minutes of the board meeting, approval expenditures. That is not up there. Okay. Stetson Engineering, 75,13770. The Daily Independent, 46176, 18753, and 13260, and PAC Rep 20767. The financial report and the search for grant funding to assist the IWV GA activities. I know the first three are approvals. Could someone tell me why we have those last two items, the financial report and the consent calendar? Or would you like to just give us a minimal report of those items? Staff?
Yes, I can report on that. Both of these items were prepared by Alan Christensen, who is not here today. The financial report just outlines what our current balance is for our GA budget. What's not in the budget is our cash flow, which shows that we're basically going to run out of cash flow this September if nothing else is done. The other report has to do with the search for grant funding. It was a report prepared by Alan Christensen outlining his efforts as a member of the GA in seeking grants for the Groundwater Authority, his thoughts on what type of grants are out there, and his suggestion on what we should be looking for in the future. And that was drafted for the benefit of the Groundwater Authority Board as well as the TACT and the PACT.
Okay, and where are we going with that search for grant funding?
Well, obviously that will lie with the Water Resource Manager, the General Manager, as well as I believe the TACT and the PACT, or at least have the information out there what's available.
Okay, then we will wait to hear that with you, sir. Okay. All right, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the report from the Water Resources Manager. Sir.
Make sure I'm on. Am I on? I'm on. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Steve Johnson with Stetson Engineers. I was hired as I see a lot of new people, probably as a result of June 7th, I'm expecting. For those of you who didn't see me there, I was there along with Ron. We were there. It's great to see you folks here. I'm glad we got some people involved, but allow me, I was introduced there, but I want to allow myself an opportunity to get introduced to you folks here. I'm Steve Johnson, president of Stetson Engineers. We were hired as a Water Resources Manager. Our job is to put together the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. You've heard that it needs to be pulled together by the end of next year. It's got to be in by January 2020. We're working on that. We're working through the PAC and the TAC to do that on the board on certain things. We're doing a lot of other things, so you folks know, the Prop 1 grant funding, the pump fee. We're providing a lot of support to the staff to work on those items too, that the board has asked us to do. But if anybody has any questions of me after the meeting or something like that, or you can find me online, stetsonengineers.com, our website, or I'll give you my email, but make sure you know who I am, introduce myself. So for the Water Resources Manager's report, we have 4 items, and it would probably be, if we could do that, make sure this is okay, if we can go through the 4 items and maybe take questions from the board, and then when we're all done, take questions from the audience, any questions or comments from the audience on all of it. It might go faster, but we'll see if that works. The first item is a report and discussion on the poem, the Plan of Action and Milestones, which has been prepared as sort of a guidance schedule document for our work on the GSP. It's constantly being updated. It's constantly being modified. We ran into a bit of a lull on the poem on modifications, working with the staff and with the board and with the Navy on our groundwater modeling, and DRI, who has the model and is doing the modeling work with our oversight and coordinating with us, and certainly coordinating with the Water District on the work that's being done by the Water District. But the poem is intended to be a guidance document. It is changing all the time. I think it was just revised, updated this week. Jeff Helsley's from my office. He's our engineering manager for Stetson Engineers. Jeff's here to present the poem fairly briefly. I realize it's a very detailed document. We generally try to provide an overview in addition to all of the detail because there's a lot of links. We've been asked to include a lot of things, not only what we're doing and when we're going to plan to do it, but what they link to the critical path, how they link to cost, how they link to budgets and all that. So there's a lot of information in there that makes it a fairly complicated scheduling document, but I think Jeff's going to try to make it as simple as we can. So, Jeff?
Thank you. Good afternoon by 1 minute, Madam Chair and board members. If we could go to the first slide there, thank you. We were asked at, I think, the last board meeting to prepare a kind of a summary poem or schedule, which is what we're presenting here. It has a lot of ongoing tasks. It's got some of the master tasks in it and ongoing. The only thing I wanted to point out in this schedule is down towards the middle of it, there's a couple of the shorter lines, and those are shorter duration and things. Thank you very much. That didn't work. Okay. The couple of the shorter lines in the middle there are that will be concluding fairly recently are the imported water study that's underway to find a source of imported water and how to bring it into the Indian Wells Valley Basin and what it will cost. And the even shorter line is a recycled water study looking at how we might reuse more of the wastewater that's generated by the city's wastewater plant and use it to replace groundwater that's pumped. This is the more detailed poem, and the top set of blue lines there are, you can see some of those are actually concluding here in the next, within this month or within the next couple of months, and those are some of the ongoing studies that have been going on for a little while. One of those lines is the study we just saw a presentation on, the USGS recharge study. The salt nutrient management plan's also been completed by others, and the brackish water study is on there that will be wrapping up, and all that information will be looked at and information used in preparing the groundwater sustainability plan. The red lines are the critical path for the project, and we've talked about the modeling update that DRI needs to do to make to improve the model and its ability to address the groundwater sustainability plan issues. That work is underway. That's the top red line there. There are connections to some of the subsequent tasks. There's going to be a workshop at the end of this month with an ad hoc committee of the Technical Advisory Committee to talk about the model, the recharge, the issue we were just talking about, as far as baseline recharge and pumping. And we will be talking with the TAC at one point about the calibration that's being done too. Some of those other red lines that will be coming up here towards the August time frame and through September, we'll start talking about probably at the next TAC meeting, we'll start talking about at least an initial discussion of the sustainable management criteria. We're not going to settle on those for a few months because it's going to take a few months to talk about those criteria, but we're going to begin that discussion. That's one of the red lines in there. And then just to point out that the two red lines in the middle there are a couple of the steps in the imported water study. So the imported water study is on the critical path. That study will be bringing, I think, some preliminary results to the next meeting. We've been showing the TAC the options we've looking at, the information we've gathered. I think they're starting to form up into potential projects now. We'll present those and be developing some of the details of it over the next few months and have a report probably in September on that. And then the bottom of that page are a few months down the road, actually into the beginning of next year, when we start talking about what's the implementation plan, what are the actions. We'll have all these this information developed. That is, what would imported water cost us? How much recycled water is available? What would that cost us? Well, some of the earlier tasks are talking about the water balance and the results of our modeling. These bottom lines are when we start talking about what do we put together as a plan to manage the basin. So those are coming up after the start of next year. And that concludes what I wanted to present.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. And I guess we'll move on to the next item, so we're trying to get through this report. The next item in the Water Resource Manager report is a report on submittal of Proposition 1 grant application status. And I think for the folks, well, let's go back. There's a lot of folks here who haven't heard all of this. Clear back in October, November, we started working on it, I think in September and October, an opportunity for state grant funds, Proposition 1 grant funds. The opportunity was available to apply for funds for developing of groundwater sustainability plans. We coordinated through the board and through the committees that it would make sense that this organization would make an application for those grant funds. There were two types of funds available. One was for generally across the basin for developing the GSP and programs associated with the GSP. That's Category 2. Category 1 is for disadvantaged communities. Category 2 required a 50% match, and whatever your costs were, the state would provide 50% match with what your costs were, including in-kind services that you can apply for, going back to, I think it's June or July, something like 2017. So we were instructed to prepare this. We were directed or requested to prepare this grant application. Oh, excuse me. Category 1, the disadvantaged community, requires no match from the locals. It's going to be all grant funds, and it's for disadvantaged communities in the area. We prepared the applications back in October, November, submitted in November. The maximum amount under Category 2, which is for the GSP for across the entire basin, the maximum grant amount is $1.5 million. So basically, you had to show total cost exceeding basically $3 million. We submitted, that includes in-kind service, and there are a significant amount of in-kind services, so the rest of that balance is not necessarily all coming from the authority or from whatever pump fees or whatever whatever sources of funds. But it needed to be over $3 million to get the full $1.5 million grant fund. So what we did, we put it together. We put a lot of projects in there. We put a lot of in-kind services in there. We ran it through the TAC at least 2 times, the Technical Advisory Committee, getting input on the different programs different projects and different processes we put in here into that grant fund to be able to, and part of our instruction was to try to maximize the grant amount. So we did. We put together a work plan for that, submitted it. It was approved. We're in the process of finishing the approval process, which will result in fully executing the agreement with the state that would provide grant funds for $1.5 million, matching to $1.5 million of in-kind and actual cost by the authority, and I think it's about $450,000, $60,000 for the Category 1, which is the disadvantaged communities, which is straight grant funding. So that gets you up to speed. About 45 days ago today, because it was a 45-day requirement to respond, and it was due today, we received notice from the state. Actually, it got filed up on addresses where it was sent, but we ended up getting it, and the state notified the authority that the grant fund was approved and that there's an opportunity right now, in those 45 days, to really do 2 things. Look at your work plan. Make sure you're happy with your work plan. If you have any changes, now's the time to do it. And to file the environmental documentation, which was really just a form. So fine, we did that. So we looked at the work plan. One of the things that we noticed was that since back in October, November, when we submitted the Prop 1 grant fund application, some things had changed. Some things had changed that required us, we were required at that point to make a change to the work plan. a couple. I've got a lot of notes here. I'm going to talk off the top of my head, and if we need more detail, we can provide that, because ultimately the changes that we did resulted in very minimal changes to the grant fund application and the work plan and the budget, but there were some changes. Those changes were actually submitted to the state through Ron, through our general manager, were submitted to the state yesterday and confirmed as received, so we got it done before the deadline. Today was the deadline. So that's the big picture. As I mentioned, our evaluation of making those changes to the work plan involved looking at what we had to change. There was things that we could not go forward with under the work plan, and then ultimately make applications for funding from the state with things that weren't correct. One of the primary changes was, since we applied for that, we made the application, and we started doing work and submitting invoices, working through the county, working through Alan Christensen, who was the general manager at the time. Kern County, which is where Alan Christensen works, and it still is, essentially managing some of the finances and the accounting. They had a distressed counties grant available that funded some other work, but some money was available, so they used some of that money to actually pay some of the bills for the work we were doing in November, December, paid some of those bills. So that changed our application, because we actually had some money coming in from a grant that were paying some bills that we cannot submit. We cannot submit to the Prop 1, so we had to pull those out. We also had some increased costs since then. Some things like our evaluation, our work on the model that we're working with DRI, and working with the brackish water study, and working with everybody on the model. Some of those costs have gone up more than was in the budget. So we had to look at those and make sure we bring those up to date. We also had an estimate of administrative costs associated with operating the authority. Some of those have changed. Some of those have gone up too. So we wanted to make sure that we got them as accurate as we could with this application. We made those changes. After we evaluated the required changes that needed to be made to the Prop 1 grant application work plan, our next task was to take it to the TAC and get input from the TAC on the required changes to make sure they're comfortable with the required changes. But in addition to that, walk through the work plan and get input from the TAC on anything else, any changes that the TAC saw that might want to be changed as part of the work plan to get this GSP done. So we spent a period of time going through those. Long story short, the efforts by the TAC, so you folks know, this is where the direction they gave is, anywhere you can reduce cost, reduce cost. As long as it doesn't affect qualifier, as long as it doesn't affect our ability to get the $1.5 million grant funds. So that's what we did. So we've made some changes that are optional changes. Two areas of the changes that we made that reduced the cost a bit involve stream gauging stations, where we had applied for, because we didn't know at the time what was available, we had applied for 2 new stream gauges complete. We got direction that there were some stream gauges out there that could be rehabbed and be used, could be done a lot cheaper than new ones. We changed it, we put those in and changed those. Weather stations, we had 2 new weather stations. We made a change so that we only have 1 new weather station, and then we're having another weather station. I think Judy Decker actually provides some information on that. So we made those changes. So all in all, we revised the Prop 1, grant fund application work plan to implement the required changes and also implement the optional changes in an effort to reduce cost. The net result, our costs are still right at $3 million. Therefore, we're still in line to get the full $1.5 million. That was one of the goals, so we accomplished that. And there was a net, and as I mentioned, there was some increased costs from before, but even after the $80,000 that came in and all those things came in because of the increased cost, we're still able to accomplish a net of about $6,000 reduced cost in the authority going forward with the new work plan. So that's the current status. It was submitted yesterday along with the environmental documents, so we're up to speed, we're up to date. Next step is to actually execute the agreement. So we wanted to give our contact an opportunity to look at what we've done, and then we'll be in contact with the state to evaluate the next step, which would be to execute our actual agreement, which then means we can actually start preparing a progress report and make an application for some money to come back from the state. So that's our next step. The board has, the authority board has authorized the general manager to sign that agreement, so there shouldn't be any hiccups. We should be able to go forward and get that agreement executed. So kind of a long report, but we got a lot accomplished in this last month on the
Okay.
Prop 1. Okay?
All right.
So that was the summary. That was the summary. You're right. Those are a lot longer. So if everybody's okay with that, I'll go to the. Oop, I just lost my glasses. Oh. I'll go to the next item, which is a discussion of approval, and we're not looking for approval. This was prepared prior to some more recent discussions. Discussion approval of draft well registration form, reporting form, and draft FAQ. That's frequently asked questions. So, oh boy, sorry.
That was me. I was just messing with you.
Seriously?
No.
Oh, you would do that too.
I could, couldn't I?
You would do
No.
that. Okay,
No.
this was put on the agenda for just one purpose, and that's just information. As I mentioned, I was at the June 7th meeting. We didn't get a lot accomplished at the June 7th meeting. One of the goals of the staff, this is just to let you folks know that the folks up here are trying. For that June 7th meeting, it was intended to be informational. This is just from me. I wasn't asked to do this. It was intended to be informational to let people know what the board was doing. That was the whole intent of the darn thing. We actually had discussions ahead of that meeting about how many copies of these of these forms and the FAQ we should provide. And our discussions went around, well, maybe 50, and somebody said maybe 75. So let's just be safe. Let's bring 100. Well, obviously, that was a mistake. I mean, you just got to own up to it when it happens. That was a mistake. We were not even close. I mean, all of those forms were gone before we even got started. I had a set for myself because I had planned to talk about them there. I sent them down. It was gone before I even looked down again. Somebody took it. So I didn't have mine even there. That's how fast it went, and that's how the meeting went. It obviously didn't go well. I think there's going to be a discussion about trying to redo something like that on the board. But the reason why I put it on this agenda is because we did get comments back from board members. We got comments back from staff. We got comments back from TAC and PAC about those documents, those draft documents. We have revised them since then. One of the concerns that the public had was we can't even find them. They're not posted yet. Well, we hadn't posted them yet, but that comment was a good comment. So we've received a lot of comments since the 7th. We have revised all 3 of those documents. We have posted all 3 of those documents now on the website, so they are there. I will caution you right now, they're not right now, because based on the discussions I've had over the last couple of days, there's things that need to be changed in those documents. They say draft, and I'll give you the other heads up. There is a revision date at the bottom. I've got them here. I can tell you what the revision date so you know which one you've got. The revision date says 6/19/2018, which was just day before yesterday. That's when we last revised it and posted it. So if you're looking at 6/19/2018, you're looking at the latest, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's not correct. Nothing needs to be done with these for a while because there's actions going to happen or not happen. Something's going to happen today on later agenda items. Based on what happens today, we will be revising those and reposting them with a new revision date. And we did bring copies today here up at the front. So if you didn't get a copy at June 7th and you can't find it online, there's copies here. So that's my report on that item.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So I'm going to go to the next one, which was the last one for me. This is the TSS grant application status. TSS is Technical Services Support. This is another state grant that was the opportunity was raised during our TAC discussions. It's an opportunity where the state of California has facilities like well drilling facilities, and they have staff, professional staff like geologists, hydrogeologists, folks who can monitor well drilling and do some other activities. It's an opportunity that the state makes available as grant funding to provide those services going forward. So working we talked earlier about grant funding opportunities. Here's one. This is one right here. So at the TAC, there was a suggestion that we have a look at this, and it's a first come first serve, and we got to get something pulled together and get it in. There was actually, I'm just let everybody know, being as transparent as possible. There was actually a suggestion that we submit the TSS application along with our Prop 1 grant revisions to the work plan, because our Prop 1 revision to the work plan were showing the state that we're very tight of money here, and therefore, when you look at our TSS, give us an affirmative look, because obviously we're trying to cut back our cost over here. We need more grant funds and try to impress upon the state that this is an urgent situation here on the TSS grant. Working with the state, it wasn't practical, and they even suggested we not do that. So we haven't done that. We are working on that application right now. The application process for you folks, so everybody knows what we're doing. The application process is an initial submittal of a general application, which basically just includes the general types of services that we may want to request. And in addition to that, there's a requirement in that general application that we document all of the grant funds that have been received by this area, in state grant funds by this area, over the last 15 or 20 years. But we have to go back and organize that and document all that. So that's why it's taking a little bit longer. We're pulling all that information together so we're accurate on that. And we're putting together, based upon discussions with the TAC, we're putting together the general areas that we may be submitting an application for. The general application will be submitted probably next week. It will hold our place going forward so that we can talk with the TAC and work through the TAC on what we actually have need for under the technical services support, and then we'll make an actual application for grant funding. So that is the process. Just for a little bit further explanation, so I'm telling you folks everything I know. Some of the items that they provide, for example, are, I mentioned, well drilling services. Well, we already have in our Prop 1 grant funding application work plan, we have well drilling services from the Navy and in-kind services being done by the CVs. So we already have that. So it's going to be tough to try to fit that in, but it is available. They also provide professional services like a geologist, hydrogeologist, to be on site and to help with the well drilling and documentation of the well. That could help us, and that could certainly provide input. But one of our active members on our TAC, Cyril's with Adam, we've also indicated that they have some support services like that may be available too. So we need to work out exactly what it is we're going to apply for so that it makes sense when we make the application for what we're doing and how we're going to get it done. So I think that's it. I think that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you. All right. The next item is consideration of amendment.
Madam Chair. Is the board going to get to ask questions of the?
If you'd like. Please.
Yeah, I had a
apologies.
request for the POAM. Can we get that included in the board package? Because I can't read it. I've not seen it, and there's no copies left in the front. It's not in my binder, so it's going to probably be another month before I can get my eyes on it. But if can we talked about it before. Please make sure that's part of the board packet so that we have an ability to review that prior to today.
Thank you, Commander Longbottom. Jeff, you can, if you have something to comment. Jeff's been working on this with Heather. I think yesterday they made the final changes. Was it just yesterday? Yes. Yeah, so just got it done yesterday. Is it posted? I don't know if it's posted. But it should be posted. So we'll post it and make every effort to get it as part of the package. I think the folks will recognize that there are items in the agenda package. The agenda generally gets out on time. Sometimes some of the attachments to the package are out after the posting of the agenda. But we try to get about as fast as we can, so we'll certainly take that.
And in this case, the changes to the work plan that we had to submit to the state need to be incorporated into the POAM. And we just got those finished yesterday. As soon as we finished those, we turned around and worked on the POAM yesterday and got that submitted. So in the future, we shouldn't have that going on where we're re-looking at our work plan and be able to get it out early.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, you guys all know I live for the POAM, so I don't really know what to do here when I don't get to comment on the POAM. So
we don't know what to do without you.
Thank goodness. I'm sorry, folks. I was trying to get to the item I know that you're all here for, so I didn't mean to cut off comments. So please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Derek Hoffman, legal counsel for Meadowbrook Dairy. We like the POAM too, Commander. Just a comment on the reporting form, the registration form. Just a question for clarification. Mr. Johnson, appreciate the report that you've given today, the detail. You mentioned you received substantial comments from board members on those forms over the last couple days, and it seems to me this is an open session item. It's here for discussion on the agenda, and I'd just like to know what those comments were. It seems to me that this would be the venue to have that discussion. So thank you.
Do you want to
I can
answer
reply
it?
really quick because I
please.
respect Derek's question. I don't have the details right now, but generally there were general questions about The tone of the FAQ, for example, having the penalties, have the discussion of the penalties up front and not emphasizing the fact that this whole effort, which it is, okay, the whole effort, we all know that the whole intent was to do it that way, that this whole effort is a cooperative effort, and it really didn't come across that way. We got many comments like that. We got certainly comments about incorrect things on the form, or not enough detail, not enough direction. So we got a lot of different things. We actually have, and Derek, if you'd like it, we have a red line version of what was at the June 7th meeting and what we've changed based upon those comments. And if you email, I'll send you the red line version, or anybody else if you'd like the red line version. That helps.
Right, Stu?
Yeah, Stuart Fields again. I've just got one comment. I would sure like to see it if all these tasks, when they're developed and assigned, includes one sentence that says how the completion of that task is going to contribute to the mitigation of the overdraft. Because so much of this POM, I can't find any connection to my well not losing water.
Thank you, sir. We'll hope to make that more clear as the discussion goes through TAC and PAC and back to the board. And to Mr. Johnson. All right, now, consideration of the amendment to advance funds agreement with the Indian Wells Valley Water District. Who's got that? Staff?
Jim Worth has
Jim?
it.
Hey, you want me to take this presentation also?
You can take it.
You guys.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Jim Worth, one of the legal counsel for the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority, as well as legal counsel for the Indian Wells Valley Water District. With respect to the a potential amendment to the advanced funds agreement, I think everybody recalls that back in December, the Water District advanced the Groundwater Authority $500,000 to keep the groundwater sustainability plan moving forward. And as part of the advanced funds agreement that was entered into between the district and the Groundwater Authority, the Water District, in essence, had a first priority on reimbursement of that 500 funds from any source of funding that the Groundwater Authority could come up with. Secondary method for reimbursement to the district would have been a credit that the district would have received for any groundwater fees that would have been applicable to the Water District. And as we've been going through the process to formulate the groundwater extraction fees, the topic has come up at the Water District, and at the June 11th meeting of the Water District, the board voted unanimously to defer reimbursement of the $500,000 until, I'll call it, the next round of anticipated funding. What this means is that the groundwater extraction fee would not be required to address the $500,000 that the Water District has advanced. So thereby, in essence, lowering the fee or potentially giving the district other options in the way that it imposes the fee. Along those lines, we prepared an amendment. It's very short. It just, in essence, states that the district will defer reimbursement until the next round of funding. The amendment has been reviewed by legal counsel for the county as well as the city, and we're all in agreement that this is an acceptable amendment to the advanced funds agreement. So that's all I have on that. I'd be happy to answer any questions or allow Peter to.
Thank you.
Peter, did you want to address that at all, please?
Which question?
What's going on? Well, you said you wanted to, so I was going to let you.
Oh, he was just gigging me.
All right. Okay. Sorry.
No?
All right. Then is there board comments on this item?
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any public comment on these items, on this item? Okay. With that, a motion?
Move approval of the amended agreement.
Second.
We have approval and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All All right, the next item. Okay, public meeting pursuant to Water Code Section 10730 to impose groundwater extraction fees to finance development and adoption of a groundwater sustainability plan and IWV GA administrative costs. Staff?
I've got that as well. I'm still Jim Worth. And we've been through some additional steps since we put out the data package back on June 1st. We attempted the informational meeting that Mr. Johnson talked about. So before going into the fee itself, I just want to provide a little background on how we got here, why we're here, to those people that maybe attended the informational meeting, but we weren't able to finish the presentation. I'll try to be brief, but here I go. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is a comprehensive set of groundwater legislation that was enacted on January 1st, 2015. The purpose of SGMA is for local planning to come up with plans, groundwater sustainability plans, to ensure that we have a sustainable basin. A sustainable basin isn't necessarily one set definition. I know somebody came up here and said groundwater extraction should equal groundwater recharge. Well, that might actually be sustainable, but it's not necessarily the only definition that's going to apply. And in fact, what the groundwater sustainability plan is required to do is address what the SGMA has identified as undesirable results. And so examples of undesirable results that could apply to the Indian Wells Valley Basin includes a chronic lowering of groundwater levels indicating a significant and unreasonable depletion of supply if continued over the planning and horizon period, significant and unreasonable reduction of groundwater storage. Talks about seawater intrusion, but we're probably okay there. Significant and unreasonable degraded water quality, including the migration of contaminant plumes that impair water supplies, as well as unreasonable land subsidence. So these are all elements that have to be addressed and discussed within the plan, and the intent of the plan is to eliminate, avoid, or to the greatest extent possible, mitigate these undesirable impacts. So in order to get there, SGMA, in essence, requires local agencies with water supply, water management, or land use responsibilities, as well as federal governmental entities overlying a groundwater basin to form a groundwater sustainability agency.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
I apologize. Could you, for the people in the audience, I mean, I know you talked about what the law specifically says regarding sustainability and the undesirable results, but would it be appropriate to say that for those that have their own private well on their property, that the anticipated result of avoiding an undesirable result is that the water level in the basin will not get to the level where they would have to necessarily drill deeper at this point if they're currently getting water, that the goal is that for the private domestic well owners, that we're going to protect the basin and make sure that our basin, in being sustainable, would result in not having to drill deeper wells for them.
Certainly, that's one of the goals of the GSP, is that wells would cease to run dry because there would not be that chronic lowering of groundwater levels. However, all wells are different, and
I
can't
get
guarantee.
that. Yeah. But to try to relate it to the people in the audience in terms of what this means is that's a goal, is that we protect those wells at the depths they exist now.
That is a goal, and I would agree with what you just said.
Thank you.
So SGMA requires certain local agencies to form a groundwater sustainability agency for the purpose of developing and implementing this groundwater sustainability plan. Here in the Indian Wells Valley, the board before you, the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority, was formed pursuant to SGMA to develop and implement this groundwater sustainability plan for the purpose of achieving a sustainable basin, which should have multiple benefits to all water users within the Indian Wells Valley Basin. Now, the Indian Wells Valley Basin is designated as a high-priority basin in critical overdraft, and that's been done by the Department of Water Resources. And what that means is that the Groundwater Authority is required to have a groundwater sustainability plan adopted and sent to the DWR, Department of Water Resources, for review by January 31st of 2020. So as you see, the Groundwater Authority for the Indian Wells Valley Basin is made up of 5 general members, and those are the counties of Kern, San Bernardino, and Inyo, City of Ridgecrest, and the Indian Wells Valley Water District. Those are all the general members and are voting members on the Groundwater Authority. Certain federal entities, the Navy as well as the Bureau of Land Management, have decided to take part in the GSA as what we call associate members or non-voting members. So what we're doing here is we're just trying to comply with SGMA to develop a plan to bring the basin into sustainability. Now, also understand, if we do not follow the mandates of SGMA, then the State Water Resource Control Board has the ability to come in, designate the basin as probationary, and they can impose the same types of restrictions, fees, actions as these local agencies are trying to come up with as we move forward. So if the Groundwater Authority doesn't do it, the State Water Resource Control Board will do it, and you will not have the local control that you otherwise would had. So that is kind of where we are, how we got here today. In terms of developing the groundwater sustainability plan, a budget had to be prepared, and as it's been discussed, there is a cash shortfall right now. As a result of that, on or about January 18th, the Groundwater Authority Board directed staff to come up with a fee proposal based on a volumetric usage of groundwater, and to impose it on groundwater extractors. Pursuant to SGMA, a de minimis user is not subject to this groundwater extraction fee that's being considered today. And a de minimis extractor under SGMA is defined as follows. De minimis extractor means a person who extracts for domestic purposes 2 acre-feet or less per year. California Water Code Section 10721A. So staff has been working on developing this fee proposal for getting close to 6 months now. This has been discussed at virtually every Groundwater Authority meeting since the 18th. In addition, we held a board workshop on April 5th where members of the public, members of the PAC and TAC were all able to provide comments and address the board directly on this proposed pump fee. After the April 5th board meeting, the board provided comments, and we heard the comments of the public, and we continued to work on the fee proposal. And what happened last time at the May 17th board meeting, we did a further presentation, and the board authorized us, directed us to take whatever steps were necessary to hold this public meeting today, which is required by SGMA, before you impose the fees. And I'll get into that a little bit more. So today's meeting is the public meeting that is required under Section 10730. And as I've discussed, staff has been consistent in believing that the fee should be imposed pursuant to 10730. And I'll just state what that says with respect to the imposition of fees. A groundwater sustainability agency may impose fees, including but not limited to permit fees and fees on groundwater extraction or other regulated activity to fund the cost of a groundwater sustainability program, including but not limited to preparation, adoption, and amendment of a groundwater sustainability plan, and investigations, inspections, compliance, assistance, enforcement, program administration, as well as a prudent reserve. So that is the authority that staff is recommending that the Groundwater Authority Board follow moving forward with these fees. There are also other powers that the Groundwater Authority has under SGMA that we believe also supports the authority to impose this fee. Now, 10730 requires that the fee be adopted by ordinance or by resolution. And before imposing a fee, a GSA shall hold a public meeting at which oral or written presentations may be made. The GSA must provide notice prior to the meeting pursuant to California Government Code 6066, including the time and place of the meeting, a general explanation of the matter to be discussed, and a statement that the data required by this section is available. And what that means is that the data upon which the fee is proposed to be based needed to be made available to the public 20 days prior to today. I will note that notice was provided as required pursuant to 10730. Notice of the meeting was published with the Daily Independent on 2 separate occasions, and the data package was made available on June 1st to the public. It was made available by posting it on the website of the IWV GA. Hard copies were available at the City of Ridgecrest as well as the Water District offices. And then I also believe notice was provided to the rather extensive email/interested persons list that we maintain. So we've met all of the procedural requirements for the board to proceed with the public meeting under 10730. But it is important to note that this is not the first time, as I've discussed before. We've discussed it at every groundwater board meeting. We've had a public workshop that was noticed in the paper, and we had a most recent informational meeting that didn't quite turn out as we anticipated. However, staff is in the process of rescheduling the informational meeting, and we would expect that it would take place at a different venue within the next couple weeks, certainly prior to the July Groundwater Authority Board meeting. So now, in terms of the presentation, this is item number 8 on the agenda. So if you go to the board packet, there is a data package that's included in there. This is slightly different than the data package that was published back on June 1st. However, the changes are minor, and they, in essence, relate to the district's agreement to defer reimbursement of the $500,000, as well as the changes that Mr. Johnson discussed with respect to the Prop 1 grant application. Those are the only revisions that were made to the data package since original posting on June 1st. So as indicated, de minimis pumpers, the Navy, and the Bureau of Land Management will not be subject to this fee. De minimis users are not allowed to be subject to the fee pursuant to SGMA, and there are exemptions for federal agencies with respect to who will be imposed the fee. So now if you turn to, and I apologize, based on the fact that we did this in a red line format to try to highlight and make it easy for people to show the differences, it messed up the formatting, and so the table is on 2 pages discussing the budget items. But I'm going to go ahead and go down that list right now, and the discussion starts on page 3 of the staff report, but I'll just walk down through it. The first expenditure is the GSP development cost itself, as well as the Severely Disadvantaged Communities grant. And those were initially estimated at $3,748,600, and that was reduced to just about $3,646,000. That's as a result of the resubmittal of the application. The GSP preparation costs were reduced about $100,000 down to $3 million even. As you move down, we just saw the presentation on the USGS recharge study. That wasn't free. That cost the Groundwater Authority $87,600. In addition to the development costs of the GSP itself, there are additional costs that have been identified by Stetson engineers. These are about $435,000. And in essence, these are additional costs that aren't covered under the Prop 1 grant application. So those have been included in the under the expenditures as well. The next main topic is IWV GA administrative costs. That's $161,500, and that's to cover the cost of a part-time general manager or some type of administrative position for the authority, which has been discussed by the board, and I believe a process might be in place right now to try to find somebody. The City of Ridgecrest has reimbursable costs of about $210,000, which have been included. Those relate to legal fees expended by paid by the city, as well as costs for IT support, as well as the building itself. We've estimated legal costs at $200,000. Those legal costs were basically pertain to about an estimate of $100,000 for anticipated costs and validating the GSP after it's adopted and approved. And it should be noted that since the board workshop, that number was at $350,000, but we reduced it down to $200,000, and $100,000 of it is for Mr. Markman's anticipated work, reviewing and commenting on the various elements of the plan, and then the validation action that I just described. It's about $200,000 we've estimated. The last item that we had is the reserve. You'll recall that earlier additions had a reserve at somewhere around $930,000. Through refining and discussing it amongst staff and with the board as well, we decided that we felt comfortable reducing the amount of the reserve from 20% to 5%, resulting in a savings of, I don't know, about over $700,000. So as a result of all of these changes that we've made, we've been able to reduce the expenditures by just under $900,000. And the expenditure number now that we're working with is $4,962,954. And I believe at some point that was up around $5.7 million. So we've tried to reduce as much as we could and really work on the expenditures. The next part of the budget talks about the revenue that the Groundwater Authority has received or is expected to receive. The first item is the Proposition 1 grant. As Mr. Johnson indicated, we've been awarded by DWR $1.5 million to prepare the development of the GSP. There's a local match requirement on that, so that means that the Indian Wells Valley Basin has to come up with in-kind and or direct payments to match the $1.5 million being given to us through the Grant 1 application budget. Again, the GSP is $1.5 million, and then we also received another $646,000. There's no local match requirement, so these are just funds that will be paid by the state, and these are to implement projects to assist a severely disadvantaged community. And there's two aspects to that project. One is a water conservation and rebate program, and the other is a water audit, leak detection, and leak repair program. There's been an adjustment to the in-kind services primarily as a result of the Navy's in-kind services. I don't want to get into too much detail because I'd probably get it wrong as to why the adjustment was made, but it was also part of the Prop 1 resubmittal process, I believe. And so the in-kind services have been reduced by just under $100,000. We've
Can I ask
added
a
in.
question about that?
You may.
Why? How does the Navy in-kind service dollar amount get reduced?
I would defer to Mr. Johnson on that.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could help, Commander Longbottom. What that is when we prepared the application back in October, November, we were working with the Navy on some of the costs, mostly with monitoring wells, what the cost of monitoring wells were. We weren't able to get direct cost information from the Navy. We ended up including, because the application had to get in, we ended up putting information in the application related to the cost of these monitoring wells, mostly based on our experience, good numbers, but what monitoring wells cost, that's what we submitted. As I mentioned, this relook at the work plan. When we relooked at the work plan, one of the questions that were raised by the TAC was, do we need all these monitoring wells? Well, in the process of looking at that, one, I've already mentioned to the audience that we do need these monitoring wells because they're in-kind services. So yes, we do need them, but at the same time, we doubled back with the Navy and got more current estimates on what those costs are. Just to provide as complete a response as I can, what we got back from the Navy were that a lot of the way the Navy does things, where they book cost, is actually very minimal. For example, drilling a well, a lot of the cost they book will involve just the equipment, not the manpower or the support services. Where in reality, in coordinating with the state, all of those other costs are real and they are in kind, even if the Navy provides them and don't book those. So what we ended up doing is working through the Navy's more recent cost estimates and our previous cost estimates and coming up with somewhat of a hybrid on what we want to resubmit, on what we think the real costs are going to be and what we believe are justified to submit to the state for funding.
So you're getting the same level of service from the Navy. It's just going to be cheaper than what you had in the original proposition.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank
You're right.
How could that be?
All right. So in addition to the Navy's in-kind services that have just been described in detail, we also have in-kind services for the Water District and the city, and that's primarily related to their paying for the salt nutrient management plan. There's a Indian Well General Member Agency contribution in the amount of $75,000. And for those of you that aren't aware, when the GSA was formed, the 5 general members, voting members, all contributed $15,000 to the fund to try to help get the process going. The next item under revenue is this Indian Wells Valley Water District advance of $500,000. Since the district is not seeking reimbursement of those funds at this time, and they've already paid it, it's appropriate to go ahead and put that down as a revenue item. The next item is the Proposition 1 Distressed Counties Grant. And on the prior budget, that was listed at $170,000, but it's back up to the original amount of the award, which is $250,000. And again, we were able to bring it back up to $250,000 based upon what was going on with the Proposition 1 resubmittal by Stetson. So with all of the changes to the revenue that we've made, we were able to increase revenue by about $730,000 from $3.3 million to just over $4 million. So if you do the math on the budget items, you'll see that there is a new, in the lowest that we've found yet, gap funding of $930,000. So that's what we're hoping to recoup with respect to this groundwater extraction fee that we're discussing. Now, with respect to the calculation of the fee needed to raise the $930,000, based on the water district's recent actions, I think it provides the board with some flexibility and some decisions that it will have to make. You'll recall at the last presentation of this, we were recommending an extraction fee of $35 per acre feet, and the gap funding of the $1.5 million at that time would have been met in approximately 2 years. As a result of the additional revenue and the reduction in the expenditures, I think that there's a couple of options I'd like to go over with the board, and you could be happy with one, both, or neither, or pick something in between if the board so desires. But one option, and this is the options are, at least the two that I'm going to go over, are under Exhibit 3 in the data package. And the first option will be to go ahead and keep the extraction fee at $35 per month, and then the estimated funding required of $930,000 would be met in about 15 months. And then the second option would be to reduce the groundwater extraction fee to $25 per month, and that would be, and then the funding would be met in approximately 21 months. I guess I should have explained this first, but the way that you calculate the fee is we've made an estimate of annual groundwater pumping by those non-de minimis pumpers that will be subject to the fee. And the estimate that we're using right now is about 21,600 acre feet. That works out to a monthly pumping of $1,800 per month. And then you go through the math and you figure out how long the fee, depending upon how you want it, how big you want it to be, how long it will take to get there. So 1,800 acre feet a month is the average. If I misspoke, I apologize. But 1,800 acre feet is the average annual pumping within the basin, based on the 21,600 acre foot estimate of annual pumping. And just so everybody, we are aware that pumping does not occur 1,800 acre foot every month. Obviously, there's going to be greater pumping in the summer months. I'm sure ag uses less in the winter months, and so does the water district. So in terms of imposing these fees, staff is seeing it anywhere between $25 an acre foot, which would be met in about 21 months, up to $35 an acre foot, which would be about 15 months. If the board wanted to do something different, the board would have that option. I'm just going to go over real quick the process to follow, because I really think that's going to be covered more in the discussion on the ordinance that follows this presentation right here. But once the fee is imposed and up and running, non-de minimis groundwater extractors will be required to register their well with the groundwater authority. By August 20th, I believe the date is. There's going to be forms that will be provided to those well owners, and they'll be required to prepare certain information on the form, return it to the groundwater authority. The water resources manager will review it and either say it's approved. If not, then the groundwater authority will work with that well owner to make sure that the extraction is done in a proper method. After once you have the well registration, the pump fee, the groundwater extraction fee, is proposed to start on September 1st of this year. That would be the first day of measuring groundwater extraction, September 1st of this year. Again, forms would be sent out to groundwater extractors that are subject to the fee. They would be required to prepare the form, in essence, self-report to the groundwater authority what your extractions are, and then pay the fee that is owed. Now, I'll say that the preferred method for measuring groundwater extractions would be through a meter. a good meter approved by the water resource manager that would provide the most accurate pumping data for both sides. A secondary method will be through the use of electrical records and pump efficiency data. There are formulas that you can plug into that and come up with some pretty good estimates, but I would defer to technical with respect to that. If neither of these options are available or apply to a groundwater extractor, they will be able to work directly with the water resource manager or the groundwater authority to come up with a set of standard, an agreeable measurement method that would be used to go ahead and report what your groundwater pumping was, as well as to pay the required fee. The last thing about this is that it's a monthly fee, and there will be some penalties that are being proposed, and these penalties are allowed pursuant to SGMA. And in essence, an account that is 30 days overdue will become considered delinquent, and a 1% interest charge will be imposed on that delinquent amount per each month that it is delinquent. In addition, there's a 10% penalty, a one-time 10% penalty that will be imposed on any delinquent amount of the fee until it's paid. But that's a one-time fee. And I believe that's it in terms of the specifics for how we're proposing that the fee be adopted. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if the board has any.
Jim, do you want to explain the meaning of a first reading and the requirement of 2 readings?
No, I'll let you do that.
Bob, I know you have to leave at 1. Did you want to get any questions in before that?
I'll stay as long as I can.
Okay.
I do have a question right now for Mr. Worth. You mentioned that de minimis users were exempt from fees. Is that?
That is correct.
And you mentioned that the alternative to this authority preparing and implementing this sustainability plan would be the State Water Board coming in and preparing a plan and imposing it on the basin?
They certainly have that authority, and in fact, some will recall that 6-9 months ago, the State Water Resources Control Board came down here with the Department of Water Resources and gave a presentation and discussed what would happen if certain basins failed to comply with SGMA in terms of the forming of a GSA or the timely adoption and development of the GSP. And they said that, some of the rules and restrictions that they might impose might be quite draconian and not necessarily aware of the local nuances like hopefully you are. But that certainly is a real possibility, I believe.
Well, and specific to this discussion about fees, I think in the event of, in the event of state intervention, de minimis users are subject to a flat $100 per well fee.
And as well, they're also able to implement additional fees to cover the costs of whatever actions that they're imposing on this probationary basin that did not comply with the requirements of CEQA. So I would say that the authority that the state board would have if we didn't comply with SGMA would be quite broad.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions from council, from the board?
Is he going to explain the way we explain?
I was hoping that we would I would like to present the whole package before we talk about that. So Lloyd, would you do that? And would you make sure everybody understands where we are, what we are, and we're asking for your input?
Okay. Staff changes as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the law does not require a board to approve an ordinance at the same meeting that it's introduced. Adoption of an ordinance requires 2 meetings. The first meeting today is what's called the first reading. So all that will be approved is the first reading of an ordinance. then the plan is to have the ordinance adopted at the next regular meeting. That's in July. And I understand that in between this meeting and any adoption, there will be this informational meeting. So if the public or if the board decides to, if the public convinces the board to change materially the ordinance after the first reading, that would require another first reading. Okay. All right. Staff is recommending a couple revisions to the ordinance that was in the packet, and they are as follows. This is the. Okay, so this is in Section 4 of the ordinance, the portion dealing with groundwater extraction facility registration. It's about the registration requirement. The first paragraph describes the registration requirement. In the first sentence of Section 4, after the heading, we are inserting the words as follows. So it will read, no later than August 20th, 2018, comma, and then we're inserting non-de minimis, followed by groundwater extraction facility. So we're inserting the modifier, the adjective describing groundwater extraction facility. We're inserting the phrase non-de minimis. The next paragraph, the second paragraph of Section 4, which begins notwithstanding the foregoing, that entire paragraph, I believe it's 2 sentences, it deals with registration of de minimis extractors. That paragraph, we're recommending that it be struck in entirety. So Section 4 will not describe registration by de minimis users. That's the extent of the revisions that we're proposing that the board approve as a first reading. Thank you.
Well, I want to have some discussion here. So, however you want to have it.
It's a public hearing, right?
Right. Yeah, I would like to hear the discussion.
I agree with Madam Chair, and let me just add something then on that point, which is the motion will be a 3-part approval. There's a CEQA findings, there's introduction of the ordinance, and third is waiving the reading of the ordinance, of the entire ordinance. When it comes time to make the motion, I invite the board member making the motion to turn to me and say, as stated by the attorney, and I'd be happy to read it through.
All right, let's have some discussion from the board, or would the board rather hear from the public first? I would rather hear from the public, so does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, public, please come and speak.
Save a couple of trees.
Good afternoon. Madam Chair, members of the board, Derek Hoffman, legal counsel for Meadowbrook Dairy. I'll go through my comments as quickly as possible, and I've submitted a packet of materials for the record, and I'll describe those items as I go. As I've said now for many months, Meadowbrook is not opposed to paying a fair, reasonable, and legally compliant fee, and we recognize the need for an effective groundwater sustainability plan for this basin. But the authority's cash flow issues don't excuse it from complying with California's constitutional requirements. And today I'm going to summarize some of the comments that I've made now for many months as to why we do object to this $25 to $35 potentially fee. The first is that the proposed fee does not comply with the California Constitution. The Groundwater Authority, not the pumpers or the public, has the burden of proving compliance with Proposition 26, including but not limited to proving that the fee is not a tax requiring voter approval, that the amount is no more than necessary to cover the reasonable costs of the governmental activity, and that the costs are allocated to payers in a manner that bears a fair or reasonable relationship to the payer's burdens on or benefits from the governmental activity. Now, staff of the GA recommended 20 months ago that a fee consultant be hired to prepare a fee study for compliance with Proposition 26, but that was not done. Instead, the authority has failed to analyze or even address Prop 26, and it has not met its burden. And so I have submitted into the record copies of my March 14 and April 4, 2018 letters, as well as a copy of the October 2016 staff report recommending that a fee study be performed for the fee. Next is that the proposed fee has been developed without proper public vetting and oversight. Some might be surprised at that comment, given the number of public meetings, which we do appreciate the meetings. But instead of using a standing finance committee to consider all available funding options with accountability to the public, we were informed at the May 31 PAC and TAC meeting that the public's concerns on this fee are being addressed extensively in closed session. And I suspect that that would include today's closed sessions as well. That's not a way to garner public trust. Now, the fee is also not reasonable, and it's based upon severely incomplete pumping data, and I'll explain. The current data package lists of wells and water systems lists over 550 wells or pumpers that contain no data on pumping volumes. And many of those entities serve between 2 and 60 connections. By contrast, there are only 12 identified pumpers with pumping volume, and 8 of those 12 pumpers are agricultural users. We have also asked literally who are the de minimis pumpers in the basin that would be exempt from the fee. And I've asked several times for Mr. Hall's de minimis analysis that he referred to in the May meeting, that be released to the public, but I have not received that. Meanwhile, the data package today has gone ahead and added estimates for agricultural pumping. Proceeding with a volumetric fee that is derived from severely incomplete data and simultaneously withholds critical information would improperly target agricultural users and violate Proposition 26. And frankly, this approach reflects comments made publicly by Board Member Gleason in April that the agriculture community has seen its heyday and that the future for Eastern Kern is aerospace and renewable energy. If I may, just one moment longer, please. And I've submitted a copy of the April 6, 2018 Daily Independent News article into the record with that comment. Now, there are ways to resolve the issues, and we've offered those suggestions. First, to help remedy the data gaps, both Meadowbrook and now the PAC recommendation that you have for you today is that the well registration ought to begin first, before imposing fees. This way, you get registration from all wells, not just a select group of wells, and gather the data that you need. Otherwise, imposing a fee simultaneously with the well registration requirements, as this proposed ordinance would do, would guarantee that known and registered pumpers unfairly subsidize unknown and unregistered pumpers. And I've entered a copy of the May 31 PAC report into the record as well today. A couple more comments and then I'll close. We've asked that the proposed fee regulation include provisions to refund or credit registered pumpers that overpay on a fee rate that is based on incomplete pumper and pumping data. This volumetric fee is a ratio, and until you have sufficient data, we believe that it overstates the amount that's needed for the volumetric fee. So in closing, Meadowbrook is not opposed to paying a fair, reasonable, and legally compliant fee, but we just don't believe that that's what we have before us. And we're asking to be treated fairly, as are many members of the public who showed up in droves at the June 7 meeting, for the informational meeting. And I've submitted 2 copies of the Daily Independent articles of June 9th and the news review of June 15th into the record. And my final point is, in light of the many unresolved issues and withheld information that I've summarized today, and both at length in my prior comment letters and orally before the board here in the public, I am submitting a Public Records Act request under the California Public Records Act today, and it's included in the packet before you. And I look forward to receiving that information because I believe that there are still quite a bit of information that needs to be presented publicly to justify the fee that you have before you today. Thank you. And thank you for the additional time.
Thank you. Josh? Oh, I'm sorry. There's another one. Go ahead, please.
Joshua Nugent, Mojave Pistachios. I just wanted to echo a little bit of what Derek said, in that a fair, reasonable, and legal fee has always been what we've supported. I think the problem comes with what's the underpinning of that fee, which is the budget and the financial process, as well as the PAC and TAC input that's got us here. And so, again, beating the same drum, it would have been nice to have had a standing finance committee where a lot of these issues could have been aired and vetted, and the public would have felt like even though they're going to be subject to a fee, that they would have had more input into it, so there would have been less blowback, in my opinion. Furthermore, this whole process with a standing finance committee and allowing PAC and TAC input would have allowed us to have had what was originally intended, was meaningful participation, cooperation, and coordination. Because I still feel that if everyone has more of a say and more input, at the end of the day, there will still be a fee, we'll still all have to pay, but we'll all have felt that our voices were heard, and that as a result of our voices being heard, the end result is fair, reasonable, and legal. So again, we don't have any problem with the fee, that there needs to be a fee, but it's the underpinnings of the fee that we have some issues with. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Leila Labani at 8160 Siebenthal Road in Kern, California. And I want to address
Let me just ask, public, can you hear? I'm going to bring it down.
Maybe I can do this.
Thank
I can
you.
do this.
All right.
And move it around. Okay. Thank you for listening. I wonder, I'm putting a meter on my well. I am not my own water company, but in a way, I am each individual well. When I need a new pump or I need this or I need that, I don't go to Ridgecrest Water Company. I have to repair my own wells. I have the expenses of keeping my well up to par, and it doesn't just come free. And then to come in on my property and check how much water I'm using is irrelevant, actually, to what your process is today, because I don't share the expenses that I have with Ridgecrest Water Company. I would just ask you to take some of this into consideration, that I pay for keeping water running on my property. It doesn't come free. So what will I do with the expenses I have? What would you want to do with them? That's what I ask you today. Would you give some consideration for that? Pumps wear out. Everything on my well wears out.
May I ask, how many people are on your well, using your well?
One.
You?
Me.
You're not.
My husband passed away in 2009.
Okay. I'm sorry I brought that up. No, we were just trying to see how many people are using your well, because you are a de minimis user.
Yes.
And therefore, you are not part of this process.
But the thing of it, well, I'm learning.
That's what we hope we all are doing here. Thank you.
I am learning, but I just want to bring forth the fact that my water is not free. It costs me a lot, like even $3,900 last year, and I had to go to bat on my own to take care of that. So I don't have people. I can't come to Ridgecrest Board and say, well, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And I don't have that, would not have that freedom, and I wouldn't have the response from Ridgecrest Water Company to come and minister to me the needs that I have. So I just thought I would remind everybody that water is not free. There's a cost, and somebody has to pay for it. And so I feel like I'm paying for mine and what I have to do.
It wouldn't be the Ridgecrest Water Company, because they're Indian Wells Valley Water District, but it's the GSA.
All right, well
but
then,
either way, you are not part of this process right now,
all right, well,
because you're using a minimal amount.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
But I just wanted to say that water is not free, it's very costly.
It is. Thank you. We have lunch back there.
Good afternoon. Am I the right distance from the microphone here?
I can't hear you very well. Maybe just make it straight or something.
A little closer?
Yeah,
That's it.
Thank you. My name is Lauriston Boardman. I live on Brown Road, north of Inyokern. First, I would like to thank the lady's comment before me in noting that maintenance and ownership of a well is not a cheap item. You may have the years that nothing goes on, and then that pump down at the bottom fails, your casing fails, your pipe fails, and that you pay for personally. You don't call a water company and say, fix my well. Okay, that said, I have some concern about this de minimis classification and the possibility of water meters being installed. Regarding the water meters, I haven't heard anything about who's going to pay for these. Am I going to have to pay for this meter myself that is going to be mandated that I install, or is this going to be paid for out of the people who are going to receive the funds? Second is, although I am not pumping water for a large group, I have windbreak trees and landscaping, and I have not heard anything about how to certify de minimis. If because I only have a household of 2 people, it's generally thought, great, I'm de minimis and I don't even have to register. 5 years from now, if somebody comes out and says I need a meter, and they find I'm using 2.1 acre feet instead of 2, am I going to be subject to 5 years of past penalties because I was de minimis before, or thought I was? So I would appreciate some comments in these 2 regards. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff, would any of you like to address that?
I think Steve should.
Would.
I'll try. I'll do because it was the last item and I remember it the best. I'll try to do the last one first. Okay. You just heard today about deferring registration of quote unquote de minimis wells. Yes. Deferring that registration. That was in the ordinance that's been taken out. I can tell you that one of my goals was to try and get registration of the wells early, and I know it's controversial, but this is me just trying to do my job here, to get registration so that we can start working with folks like you so that you know ahead of time if you're de minimis or not, well before there would be a fee. That was one of the goals, so that it wouldn't come up to a situation where 5 years from now they determine you're de minimis and they kind of look back on it and you got to develop an issue. I don't think we have an answer for that yet right now, because right now the registration has been deferred. I can tell you that discussions with the board in closed session and with the staff on the issue of de minimis wells, even though it's been taken out of the ordinance, and understandably so. As I've mentioned before, I was at the June 7th meeting. I understand the concerns and what's going on with the community. One of the things that, and I'm going to jump the gun on this because we talked about it. We already talked about it, but I don't think I was the one who actually mentioned this. One of the goals is going to be that, based on what is accomplished here today, that in a cooperative nature, one-on-one, trying to work with the community, that Ron Strand and myself, as the general manager, water resources manager, would be cooperatively working with you folks that are de minimis to try and resolve some of those questions as we go forward with this other work while you're not involved in a formal required registration. But we try to gather that information so that ultimately we can all get on the same page. So a lot more, less formal, not being required to register, but still try to work with you folks cooperatively to gather this information. And part of the reason for that is we've been criticized. This board has been criticized. I was not here, but the board has been criticized for not starting this work 2 years ago. Deferring registration just pushes it back again. And everybody understands that, but we also understand the sensitivity of that. So the goal is to try and get people on the same page. I think the conclusion right now is, or at least the direction right now, I should say, is to try and do this more cooperatively with the de minimis users and gather that information so that we work together to get that information going forward, and we don't create a situation like you just described.
Yeah, that is a great deal of concern to me because, said, I have windbreak, I have pets. I don't have horses and cattle, but I have other pets that I feed. I have swamp coolers. All are water consumers, and even though I may think I'm de minimis, I said 5 years from now we'd be could be in a bad position if somebody said I wasn't.
Yeah, but based on what you're telling us today, it sounds to me like you're most very likely a de minimis user.
Okay. Is there any strategy for certifying people to be de minimis?
I can tell you this, again, we're working on the direction right now. Based upon that, we got a lot of comments in. I was even asked by, I think Derek asked what changes we made. One of the changes we had made, because at the time we were still planning on registering everybody, including de minimis, one of the changes we made to the registration form was adding a spot where a person could just declare when you register your well that you believe you're de minimis. That was going to be on the form. I don't think that form is going to go out to you now, but that was the idea, is to work with the community, get your thoughts, get your feelings about what's happening or not happening, so that we all have the same information and just try to work together toward that. But at this point, I don't have an answer for that, because certainly without registration, we're not going to know. So that's the only path forward that I know of, is to do cooperatively until we get to the adoption of the GSP. Then things may change, because I think after that there's a potential that the board may require registration. But that's not until after 2019, sometime in 2020.
Okay. Well, the earlier we can make a distinction to define, not just define in words, but define property by property, who's de minimis, I think everybody would be much happier.
Let me add on that. Yeah. Certifying would only work looking backward. You could only be certified that you were under 2 acre-feet per year in the past year. That could change, and it wouldn't be something you could hold on to in the future if you increased your water use.
Well, recognizing that, of course, but it still creates a starting point if you know what you're at today based on past history. Okay, and the question of the flow meters.
There's not a good answer for that right now. I'd like to give you one. I know one of the discussions we've had is, as we go forward, in the event that there is a requirement to put meters on, which has not happened yet, to be looking for, because I'm sure this is going on throughout the state of California. This is not just a local issue. This legislation by our governor is throughout the state, that there's likely to be some funding available, whether it's partial or total funding, to help fund some of those things. So we will certainly be looking for that. I have not heard a discussion yet about, well, I shouldn't say that. We have had a discussion about funding it through the authority or funding it through the fees but there's been no decision on that yet, because obviously that just increases the cost of the fee if you try to fund that. But there certainly has been direction on trying to find some outside funding to help do that. But that's all we have right now.
I understand there's some board members who would like to make some comments on your questions, too.
I just want to clarify what the Water Resource Manager just said. To be more blunt, the state prohibits us from requiring meters at this point.
Thank you.
Once the GSP is adopted, as part of that development of that GSP plan, that plan that's developed by the community and with the Water Resource Manager and approved by this board could require that. But we can't, by law, require meters at this time.
Okay.
Thanks. Oh, one more thing. It's hard to get a word in edgewise when he's talking down there, I think I've met my match. Anyways, as far as whether you are or aren't, you could probably extrapolate that from your pump size and how long you pump and your electric bill to come close. But this isn't about we're not looking at splitting hairs. We're just looking at a broad scope. And so 2 acre-feet a year is 651,702 gallons. And so you can use a lot of water irrigating trees.
Yeah, I understand that.
I do too, because I actually have a well as well. So I actually wash my water. But so the point is, it's all right. It's all in good faith, and we want to work with everybody, and that's why we're going to go look around and see what's really happening, because that's part of our due diligence responsibility. So to answer your question is, I, as a board member, I have no intention of going backwards and finding somebody that was at 2.1. They said they were at 1.9. That's not the intention. The intention is just to identify total extraction so that we can come up with a better water budget. That's the intention.
Okay.
So hopefully
I
that
appreciate
helps.
that, but I have, as everybody has, I'm sure, has run into government situations where 10 cents and you're over a limit.
Yeah, well, that's
right. The
yeah, I
people don't-
understand.
I can't waive that.
I got it.
right?
I've dealt with the IRS in the state of California, and yeah, I got it.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a good question.
All right, next, please. I believe there was no other comments from the board.
Good afternoon. My name's Elaine Mead, and I have addressed this board several times in the past, as well as the Water District and the city. I have asked, along with numerous other public members, that this board send a notice to every APM number in the Indian Wells Valley Basin, notifying them of this process. People don't know what's going on. They have no idea if it affects them. Until you define totally what a de minimis user is, you can't say de minimis users don't have to register their wells. Because if you don't clarify it, nobody knows if they're de minimis. And 2 acre-feet is not the only stipulation of a de minimis user. In response to the gentleman's conversation just now, I didn't know until a few days ago. If you have over a half acre of plantings, grass, windbreaks, shrubs, whatever, you're no longer a de minimis user, no matter if you're under 2 acre-feet or not. So I think there's some research that needs to be done by this board.
We're going to provide. Can you hear me? Hello. We're going to provide the definition of de minimis to be as clearly as possible. What you just said, I have never heard that, so I'm not sure where that came from.
That's in the water code.
That if you have a half an acre of planted stuff, you're automatically not de minimis?
Yes.
I'll have to find it.
I will give you.
Well, I'll just ask these guys. We're paying them, so they
Okay.
can find it. Thanks.
But I don't think that this board can define de minimis. I think they have to research the law and find
The law
out.
defines de minimis, and we're going to try to make it easy, like 1, 2, 3, if that's even possible. But yes, we're going to do that.
You have to look further than just the one statute that Jim
We're going to
Worth
do
read.
that. It'll be all inclusive, all encompassing, as much as humanly possible.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope you will look into it.
Legal, can legal tell us again what a de minimis user is and how that is defined, so those people who recognize that it's for domestic use and please, so I'm not going to define it, please define it.
We're asking county council to help us out with that.
Okay.
Would you give the code too, so if someone wants to look it up also? Thank you.
I'll do better than that. I'll point to the ordinance draft on section 2.3, which is definitions. De minimis extractor is defined, and it shall have the meaning set forth in Water Code section 10721E. That's Sigma, and I don't need to pull it up right now because we pretty well know it by heart at this stage. It's a person who extracts less than 2 acre-feet per year for residential purposes. So I'm not sure where this half-acre concept came from. I've never heard of that before.
Neither did I.
Please.
Okay, the definition, according to 1021.E, is a person who extracts for domestic purposes 2 acre-feet or less of groundwater per year. That's the definition that most people refer to all the time. Okay. If you go to the emergency regulations fact sheet, it says that SGMA defines a de minimis user as a person who extracts for domestic purposes 2 acre-feet or less per year. A person who extracts 2 acre-feet or less per year for a non-domestic purpose is not considered de minimis extractor. Domestic purposes do not include commercial activities. A person who extracts more than 2 acre-feet per year for a parcel is not a de minimis user. De minimis users are exempt from reporting in unmanaged areas. The definition under Section 660, Division 3 of Title 23, California Code of Regulations states, domestic use means the use of water in homes, resorts, motels, organization camps, campgrounds, etc., including the incidental watering of domestic stock for family sustenance and enjoyment, and the irrigation of not to exceed 1/2 acre in lawn, ornamental shrubbery, or gardens at any single establishment. The use of water at a campground or a resort for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes is a domestic use. That's where the 1/2 acre came from. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? I don't want to get into his and hers, but it is a significant change in the definition, if indeed that is an emergency use.
I think what you can rely on is if you are watering 1/2 acre foot or 1/2 acre, if you're watering that much, you're going to be more than de minimis because you're going to use more than 2 acre feet. That's going to be what you're going to get when you start doing your application of water and how much water grass needs. So I have a 1/2 acre. It takes a lot of water. In fact, it's usually brown. But okay. I think that's where you're going to come, because grass, well, we don't need to get too far down this, but that's the purpose. Domestic purposes is going to include your house and your necessary yard around your house.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I won't do that again, because this isn't a give and take time. We want to hear what you have to say and answer what we can as reasonably as we can.
We got off on technicalities of the law. I would like to reemphasize what Elaine Mead said about sending a notice to every APN number. Several months ago and last month, I told you I recommended that you make sure you dotted your I's and crossed your T's and communicated equally with everyone. It's obvious from the June 7th meeting that you did not do that. You need to slow down a bit, look at the details, but you need to spend the money and make sure that every property owner knows what's going on by sending them a short letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Yes, my name is Doreen Conaway Baker from Sierra Shadows Ranch. I just would like to agree and say that there is a lot of different opinions of de minimis. And we keep going back to who is and who isn't, and that is the discussion. But at the same time, if we want to be fair, I believe that if you're going to register wells, you need to register all wells and you need to do it all at the same time, and then that's the only way you're going to find out who is actually de minimis and who isn't. And then that way you can go forward with your fee and it be fair to everyone and not just say, well, you might be ag and, even though this person here has 40 acres and yes, it's all done in windbreak, but that's de minimis. Well, it probably isn't, but if it's just one household on there, how are you going to know unless you register the well and do the groundwork? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Okay, board comments. How about, Commander, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I'm just slightly confused on the wording of the ordinance. So staff made it a point in the change to add in the front of the first paragraph of section 4 before the groundwater extraction facility, you specifically added non-de minimis. But in section 12, we already say that non-de minimis users and federal entities are exempt from this ordinance. De minimis, sorry. So are we adding that to the beginning of section 4 to emphasize a point?
To explain it.
Well, the reason I asked is wearing my federal hat is if we're making a point on that particular provision to emphasize non-de minimis, why are you not also adding federal, non-federal entities? So am I required to register all of the Navy wells? When I read this, I would say no, but I've heard otherwise outside of this meeting. So I'm confused as to what my requirement is as a federal entity moving forward.
Legitimate question. Staff? Anyone? Board?
It is a clarification to add non-de minimis. Maybe the question is, when we formerly had the registration requirement, how was that consistent with the exemption that the officer mentions? So what would we like to do? The exemption covers it, eh?
If we clarify more fully by adding the exemption, can we do that?
I have no problem registering the wells because I provide all of my consumption data anyway. When I read this, I shouldn't have to.
Because of the exemption.
Yes, sir.
Exactly. Okay, Bob?
That's all I'm pointing out. That's what I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do based on this.
The way I see the answer to this question is, as the commander points out, Section 12 says, as provided by law, and in particular California Water Code, Section 10.730, federal entities are exempt from the provisions of this ordinance, as are de minimis extractors, unless and only if the particular provision expressly provides otherwise. So the section that had for registration, Section 4, had something specifically otherwise indicated for de minimis users that they also had to register. So the recommendation that staff had made in terms of amending the ordinance was to strike that sentence that said that de minimis users had to register before October 1st. If you strike that and you still have the exemption in Section 4, you don't need to add the word non-de minimis earlier in Section 4. And then we're clean, I think.
I agree.
And then I would not register. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
That doesn't mean you can't choose to.
Tell me what to do.
We're not trying to do that. Okay. Is there any other, I take it there's no other public comment, so board.
The public hearing is closed?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I'd like to hear from the council as to, sorry, can you hear me?
What?
Public comment closed.
All right, we'll have one more public comment.
My name is Myron King again. I may be out of order here, but I thought I understood that as a non-de minimis user, I would have to register, but after this conversation, it appears maybe I don't have to register. And if that is the case, then why, if you fall into the category of non-de minimis, why don't you just go home and forget about the whole thing?
That's your choice, sir. Okay.
The reason you should care is that the law says that once we adopt a GSP, you do have to register your wells. And we could determine through the GSP process and developing the plan, there's going to be a determination about whether or not we believe the collective impact of de minimis users creates an issue we have to address in the plan. So I would recommend that all private domestic well owners stay attuned to what we're doing and what we're talking about, because there's still a process to go through, determinations to be made about how we can best sustainably manage this basin. And while the proposal right now is that we would not require you to even register your wells, you will be required to by law at a certain date.
Excuse me, Myron. Did you just hear that? Did you hear that? That was an answer to your question. Did you hear it, sir? Okay, thanks. If you don't have more questions, please come back, and I'd be glad to share his thoughts with you if you like, or you can talk straight to him. I'd like to have some. I thought Mr. Hoffman brought up some points, interesting points about Prop 26. Could we address those, please?
Prop 26. I'm not following you. What those?
You're giving the new guy the duty.
Right.
You can defer to other counsel if you would like to.
I didn't hear the question.
Oh,
Okay. Thanks. Mr. Hall, did you understand it? Yeah. Could you please
great.
come up?
We're just giving you some exercise. That's why you're sitting down there, you know.
So, Derek has raised this point before. It's one of the reasons why we've gone into closed session, because he's threatened to sue over Prop 218 and Prop 26 and its application to 10730 of the Water Code. The simple response to Derek is that the legislature knows what it's doing when it passes a law. Prop 218 and 26 were in effect prior to 10730 being passed, and therefore it's the legislature's wisdom that 10730 is not subject to either Prop 26 or Prop 218. I think there's further support for that in the United case, which recently came out of the California Supreme Court. So rather than getting into the full arguments of everything, I think we're fine where we are.
Thank you. I don't recall Mr. Hoffman ever threatening to sue. Is that something?
Well, 18 months ago, I think it was a February meeting, he sent a letter which we took as litigation risk and a threat to sue, and that's when we went into closed session on these things.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. I'd like to have a clarification of understanding what. So we're here today to get this first reading, if we can do this, and assign a dollar value to volumetric extraction and timeframes and that kind of stuff. And there's some questions. I'll hear a lot of questions. So what I'm trying to get in my head is how do we best manage the satisfaction of the public and to still comply with a sigma in a way that it will guarantee our success, because we know that the gap costs are real and have to be we have to fund them. So in my mind, I'm thinking that we set up a number today that makes sense and that's achievable and that can drive costs down as reasonably as possible and still have enough money to pay the gap costs. So I want to go through the math. Can I take a minute to go through the math to make sure that everybody understands? We're going to come up with a number. Let's say we use the number 25 or 30 or 35. We multiply that number, that's per acre foot, by the number of acre feet we average through the course of a year. That's the number of dollars we bring in every month, and then we multiply that by the time the GSP is complete, which needs to be completed, which is January 2020. So if we start collecting fees in September, then we need to complete and pay off that cost by January 1st, which allows us Am I right in my math? That's 21 months? Do we have a mathematician in the room?
I think that's what they said earlier.
So whatever it is, we're going to drive up, we're going to cover our gap funding within 21 months, and that's how we're coming up with the number. But there are variables in achieving that we don't understand, that will happen. And that is variables caused by weather, by reduction in pumping, by increases in pumping that aren't accounted for now that we don't understand. So there has to be some variation in the numbers in order for us to achieve success. Is that correct? And we want to drive that number to the minimum dollar value we can, so we're not overcharging. If at the end of January 2020 we have overcharged, is it within our purview to refund the money we took in? So let's say we took in $10 and we only needed $9. Can we return $1 to the consumer or to the payer?
That was one of my questions too, based on, but is that to everybody? And how do you determine that? So go ahead. Thank you.
I guess first, unless I miscounted, I looked at my calendar real quick. January is 18 months from now.
Months. Okay, yeah.
Depending on when you count it with the ordinance going into effect. Yeah. As for the refund type option, let's start with what the law is. The law requires and limits you to only charge for what the service you're providing and for the cost of that service. So let's say we find out that we have completely underestimated and that at 21,000 acre foot is not what's being pumped. It's 25,000 acre foot, and that's the amount that you're getting in fees is based on 25,000 acre foot pumped instead of 21. You will stop collecting this fee a lot earlier because you're going to find out that you've collected enough to pay for what it's designed to pay for. The opposite could also be true. We find out that, no, everybody's already started to cut back. We're not doing 21,000. We're doing 18,000. So rather than this fee ending in January of 2020, which is our goal, because that's when we submit the GSP, it might move on to March. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you. Might want to stay close.
Okay.
I think I heard Mr. Page talk earlier about how I think what's paramount and foremost in our mind needs to be find a way to be fair. I think, and everybody brings up good points on fairness. So I'm going to try to drive my decision making towards trying to be as fair as I can. And I understand that the law says that when the GSP is approved, we need to have registration of all wells. Is that correct or not? All wells in the valley need to be registered by the GSP. Is that correct?
When we have an adopted GSP, we will need to have all wells registered so that we can monitor how much is being extracted.
Right. In order to be fair, we need to have a pretty good idea in assessing this pumping fee, which is the precedent to the GSP. We also need to be fair. And we need to have an understanding of all wells. And so the question before us is deferring the registration of wells de minimis users today in order to accommodate the ordinance, completing the ordinance and getting it signed so that we can meet the timelines, not run out of money, and to successfully complete the GSP development. So my question is, the plan is to defer, and I think that may be an acceptable strategy, but people need to understand that registration is going to happen, and we have to be fair, not only then, but we have to be fair now. So understanding all those, how do we register those wells, is going to be critical to our discussion today and how we move forward in managing those de minimis uses. But I also, but the point I was trying to get to is that tell me if I'm correct with this or not, Mr. Hall. The total consumption of all de minimis users is less than 2%?
No. I'm not sure how many single homes on one well that we have. The numbers that Mr. Hoffman is referring to, I spoke of in our public meeting at the last board meeting, and they're not hard numbers, as I said then. What I've done is we had a couple comments from people wondering about well sharing agreements. For what we're dealing with, there's 3 types of wells, and then the big guys. De minimis, one house, one well. Well sharing agreement, which is limited to people who have maximum of 4 connections on that well. And then you go into state smalls. That's 5 and above. State smalls have a public permitting system. They're a public water system. They have a lot of more regulation. A well sharing agreement is, frankly, a small piece of paper that says we all agree to share this well and pay for its costs. When we got comments saying that the well sharing agreements were going to have a significant effect on the fee, frankly, as everybody knows, I wasn't here at the April meeting. I heard those comments by watching the meeting, and frankly, they scared me because we had been operating under the impression that there weren't enough well sharing agreements out here to matter. So I went back and checked, and we have from Kern County Department of Health a listing of who's got wells. There are 71 total well sharing agreements out there, according to the county. If you multiply 71 by the total maximum number of connections of 4, and then by 2 acre-foot per house on that, you come up to about 2% of this fee total.
So my point is it's a trivial. It's almost a trivial number.
For the well sharing agreements, yes.
For the well sharing agreements.
And the one house, one well, unless you're a very large home with a very large yard, which could then be using more than 2 acre-foot, you're going to be de minimis. I think the water district's average consumer is 0.7 acre-foot, to give you an idea.
So in terms of process, what I'm thinking in my mind, I sit here and listen to, and then I read the newspapers about that meeting at the senior center earlier in the week where we tried to get an informational meeting together. What I'm thinking is it possible, is it conceivable for us today to have a first reading, assign a dollar value to the per acre foot to pumping fee, and then that's today, and then have an information meeting that hasn't been scheduled yet, but we're working on scheduling by the end of June. Have an informational meeting by the end of June, and then have a final reading in July. And the purpose of that would be to establish a number now that is within a margin of error, that is reasonable, and that is within a certain within the ballpark. Have an information meeting where the public gets to understand, and we go all out on letting everybody know what de minimis actually means, what the fee means, what is Sigma, get as many people involved in the process who may not be involved yet, get that information out as best we can, then have a meeting where we adopt the ordinance in July. And the purpose of that will be the fact that after we adopt the ordinance, then there's timelines associated with implementation and before we collect the fees. And my understanding is that if we adopt the fee in July, we will have a first crack at receiving funds in September. Is that correct?
Your first checks will arrive in October. The pumping will be September 1 through the end of September that will be charged. Okay.
And October, which will be a low pumping month probably, so there won't be a lot of revenue coming in because people aren't pumping in October and November, December. But I'm not familiar with that, but I understand there are variations in our pumping schedule. So that lines up with our cash flow, which is what we're looking at now, saying that by a very short period of time, identifying that gap funding that we're required, we're going to need to have some money in the bank in order to pay the bills, in order to continue the process of developing this GSP in a timely fashion. So I'm interested in that because I think that matches up nicely, and I think we can come real close to satisfying the public need for information. And I think we can come reasonably close to establishing a number that is a quality number for pumping fees that we can either adjust the term, shorten the term if we need to, in order to, if the number overstates the costs. Am I clear on what I'm saying? Okay. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm looking for a conversation with the board. So how do we get there? How do we get to a place where we can implement an ordinance, adopt an ordinance in July, hopefully, and that we can begin collecting pumping fees so that we continue the work to establish a GSP. Thank you.
think we've got an ordinance on the table as amended.
Well, we didn't make a motion yet.
No, I
No.
realize that. We're
But
having
I was
discussion.
seeing if you wanted to have any comments or answer anything, because I see staff over there reaching to make some comments. So,
Currently, the ordinance as written is $35 an acre foot fee. If the board is going to make an adjustment, this is the time to do that.
Okay, I got a question about that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. You're warmed up.
Okay, well, here's where we are. Then if we're at the process, then our next step is the fee, dollar cost. What's the number? And I've heard two numbers being bantered about. I've heard 25 and 35. Could someone explain to me the rationale behind 25 and the rationale behind 35?
The difference was the length of time and the presumed extraction rate. So the 35 was based on the original budget, and then we've parsed that down by 500,000. And so if we actually use that same length of time, then it would be somewhere lower than 35. What I'd like to do is maybe to split the difference right now, and then that will get us closer, because we know that we're going to be receiving less money in the fall. The water district, we use four times more in the winter or summertime than we do the wintertime. So I want to keep it up there, but I want to lower it as much as we can. And then there's a flip side of this too, and that is all these numbers are based on our existing projected budget. We're going to discuss other ways that we can save money. That being the case, then maybe we can shorten the duration of those fees. So nothing's in stone. This is our first shot. So can I make a motion, or do you want to discuss the fees?
let's let everybody else
Okay.
get a chance to make their comments. Or Brian?
I just a point of clarification, I guess, for me. My understanding is the big difference between 35 and 25 is the removal of the $100,000 reimbursement. So I got that. So that's near term. But my question is the GSA still owes that to the water district. So what was the provisions of the motion with the water district? How long was that deferred for?
The way we're looking at it is that we're prepaying future fees.
Okay, so you'll never in the future look for a check for $500?
I never use the word never, except for when I say never. But yeah, the whole point of it is to alleviate any kind of pressure. We are water. We're the only board members here that are water, and we feel it's our responsibility to minimize any impact we can. And we've been saving money for a very long time for this. So everybody's okay with it on the water board side, or on my board. And so there was no thought about give me my money back the minute the plan is approved. It would be like once the plan's adopted, then there's going to be something in the future, and so we're going to have like a gift card, little of substantial size.
And the reason I ask is I just wanted to understand, because we're talking about durations of the fee,
right.
And so that factors in. If that $500,000 is still hanging out there, okay, it's not going to hit now, but it's going to hit in 2 years. I was just trying to better understand on the fee.
Did that answer your question?
It did, yes, sir.
Commander.
Thank you.
So Peter's proposal that we set the fee at $30. In doing the math and assuming that the pumping data that was voluntarily provided through the cooperative group, that is what we're basing the dollar amount in terms of how much we think that fee will generate based on the 1,800 acre feet a month. Then doing the math, then we should be able to collect all the money we think right now we're going to need based on the budget by tracking and charging for pumping through February of 2020, with the last bills going out in March. That's assuming that all the voluntary information about pumping that was provided in previous years turns out to be what's the current situation. Correct? Okay. And so we would be collecting money even after we adopted the plan, but the plan wouldn't actually be approved yet by DWR. Right? Okay. So I'm on the question of $30. I'm okay with that. I think that gives us, should pumping end up being less than what the major pumpers voluntarily provided several years ago, ends up that was less than what they're actually doing now. Then if there's more pumping, we could end up stopping the fee earlier. If they're actually pumping less now than they were, it gives us a few more months of wiggle room before we'd have to stop collecting the fee. So I'm okay with that amount.
Okay. Is there any other board comment or staff comment?
Madam Chair, I don't recall if we moved down to item 9 of the agenda. So we might want to, before we make any motion, we might want to clarify that we're now on item 9, and perhaps you want to open that up for public comment now that there's been discussion.
Okay, I was going to ask this, and part of my comment, is there any well owner out there who does not understand what we've said today? And if you don't, please come up, ask your questions now. Then, since we're going back, we've closed the public hearing and we're going to item 9, this gives them the opportunity to respond, and I'm not violating anybody, any Brown Act or anything. Please.
Thank you, John Connect. And my question is the definition of de minimis cast in concrete, will it change in the future as conditions may change? They may say 1.5 acre feet is the new rule, and then it's 1.0, and in other words, this I'll be blunt, I and other people see this as an attempt at control. If you gentlemen and ladies are after money, I would use the analogy, although it may not apply legally, but the concept of the county dump. They had a problem with, how do we pay for the dump? And they said, let's put a special fee on the tax bill. So I get a tax bill for every parcel I own, and it has $73 or something on there, and I pay it. And frankly, I never go to the dump, but it's, it's there. I feel obligated to pay for it. Similarly, we have a groundwater authority here. I don't dispute the need for this. This is all obvious. The question is, you guys are in survival mode as I see it. I only came on the scene 3 or 4 days ago. Somebody said, hey, this is going on. So I second what Judy said. More notification needs to be made because there are what you would like to call stakeholders out there that are not represented here, that have no idea that you guys have been going for 2 years or more, doing whatever you've done so far, and for better or for worse, they're not in the process out of ignorance, not out of opting out. They did not opt out. They're not here because they don't know that this is here. Of course, a lot of them have jobs, as I do, and they have to take time off from work to come down here. So my question to you is, can you guarantee us that whatever the definition of de minimis is at this point in time will continue for the foreseeable future, excluding the craziness in Sacramento and them changing the rules later on? But can we count on that? And number 2, could you consider funding sources such as an addendum to the tax rolls, which would be through the county, which I understand we got 3 counties going here. So we have an interjurisdictional situation, which presents a unique situation, and I agree that that's challenging, but you gentlemen are all intelligent or you wouldn't be here, so you've dealt with things like this before. And number 3, as far as the concept of well registration, the requirements of the SIGMA document, which I have not reviewed and I've just picked up bits and pieces here, say that you have to have registration completed by 2020. I would submit to you that for a nominal cost, you could go to a geospatial company, maybe Stetson can do this. You take satellite photos, you analyze what a parcel is, you have the parcel maps. Obviously, every parcel has a water source. You can infer whether they're de minimis by calculating the amount of agricultural landscaping they have. So you could do all of this without imposing on people who aren't here and don't know this is going on, this onerous thing of registration, which to a lot of people who consider themselves citizens and not subjects, that registration is big brother-ish. And I believe that it's not necessary. I think you can do this thing through technical means, which people will call an invasion of privacy, but it's better than this well thing, because I suspect if this data is collected, that there will become, gee, you're using too much water. We notice you have a pool. Pools are out in the desert. Or we notice that you have a fish pond, or whatever it is. We get micromanaging individual well owners' lifestyles, which is not the American way. And I think you gentlemen all agree that we're all citizens and not subjects. So thank you.
Can we address his issue? Sigma is the law that defined de minimis as 2 acre-feet. We can't change that. Sigma, and you said the craziness in Sacramento could change it, but we don't have control over that except to address it when and if it comes. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, you're correct. Unless Phil Hall wants to add to this, it seems to me that would have to be a legislative change.
Yeah, our ordinance ties into the legislative language at 2 acre-foot. I would just say for anybody who's afraid that might change in Sacramento, the odds of it changing in the next 16 months while we're collecting this are pretty low. Because, it's just going to take them time to get any legislation to change that in place. So that's the bottom line. We tie it into the state legislation, the specific wording of the legislation in the state, and I think that the chances of it being able to be changed before we finish collecting this fee is very low.
Is there any of his other questions that we can address now? Okay, I promise we will get those answers that you asked that we have not answered. We will get answers to you at the next informational meeting. Okay, next please.
Hi, I'm Claudia Ethan, and I'm here to speak about our own personal situation here. I live in Yukon. We have a small egg business, my husband, Jack Simmons, and I. And I'm just here to tell you, speaking in the term running out of money, that's our case. And we're very small, but, I think probably many of you don't have a good perspective as far as farming. It is not often as lucrative as it's thought to be. And I realize this is our personal situation. It's different than anyone else's. But small agriculture, it's tough today. And I can just tell you personally, there's no way it's going to close us down. And maybe it's okay because we're both senior citizens. And I can move on. But the problem is now, we don't have water on the property, and what do? We're going to lose, the land value is going to go who knows where. I don't know. I mean, it's just a lot of questions. So personally, that's where we're at. There's no way I can pay it because we've had a lot of issues the last couple of years. The hay price has been not good, and, we've had some huge well issues. So, and it's extremely costly to the point where I can't fix it. So, anyway, I'm just telling you that's the way it is. I have gone to many PAC meetings, and we've talked about the issue of maybe trying to get a low-interest federal loan. And then I was told, well, it takes 2 months to get that. Well, I know I've been talking about that with your board for over 2 months. And it just seems like, as they're saying with the financial committee, just different ways of maybe seeking out this fee because there aren't many people to pay the fee. So anyway, I guess my final question is, if I can't pay, what are you going to do to me? Put me in jail? I mean, we're already going to close business down. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. We've paid our dues, my husband and I have, over the years. So this is really crucial for us. I realize we're maybe one exception in the whole bunch, but that's where it stands. So maybe it's one way of cutting down on water usage, but it also affects lives too. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Did you think we were going to? You said you would be without water. How would we make?
I'm talking about the irrigation water.
I gotcha. Okay, I gotcha.
We have our own domestic wells.
Okay.
And
I understand.
hopefully we can live there. But it's not that. I do have a retirement, but it's
Okay.
not great. But
I was just
that's
trying to understand what you were
it's
saying.
the irrigation water I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Derek Hoffman, legal counsel for Meadowbrook, and I'll be brief. Since you've kind of started taking this item and the last item together, you've moved into a new item. So for the ordinance reading, so I'm just going to incorporate by reference all my prior comments and the materials that I submitted into the record for this item as well, please, and let the record reflect that. I also want to add a couple brief points, and I'm not here to debate the law, but I'm just going to read a quote from the brief filed by Kern County Council in the case that Mr. Hall mentioned a moment ago. These are Kern County's words, not mine. Groundwater regulatory fees in SGMA would receive constitutional review under Proposition 26, which expressly covers regulatory fees through a specific exemption. Then it states, and again, this is in your April 4 letter that I submitted, and again, this is a quote from Kern County. This constraint will discipline the Section 10730 fee structures that future GSAs establish, and in cases where such discipline is lacking, provide for judicial voiding of unreasonable fees. Again, those are not my words. Those are the words of the brief filed by Kern County in the case that Mr. Hall mentioned a moment ago. So I just want to state that for the record. And also, I just want to say as well, I don't agree with the potential decision to exempt de minimis pumpers from registration. I think the wisest course to resolve the data gaps that I've identified and others have identified is to include them in the registration process. Bring them into the process. Help them get educated about SGMA by being part of the process and part of the solution. Then I would recommend that you do that and not accept the staff proposal to wholesale exclude them from the well registration process. Thank you.
Let me say this, Derek, that there was no intent to exclude them. What we said was, and help me if I don't state this fairly, is we are not going to require them at this point in time. I used to own a well at 4330 Kip in Inyokern for many, many years. I would not want anybody to tell me what I can and cannot do, because at that time I thought I had unlimited rights to everything for a reasonable, beneficial use to the water into the ground. I know now that things have changed. I understand that. And so I would want now to be a part of the process so I understood what may be required, what may not be required, and what may happen in the future. And so to register your wells to be a part of the process, to me, seems a safer, smarter way, so I make sure I know what's going on. I'm not a well owner anymore. I can only feel like a well owner and understand their concerns. So there is no attempt to exclude anybody. We want to include everyone who wants to be a part of it.
But the change, if I may respond briefly, the change omits the requirement, and I think the result of that is going to be a loss of information that would be helpful to inform the GSP as far as pumping. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Joshua Nugent, Mojave Pistachios. I just wanted to stress one more time, since it sounds like we're going to be getting to the end of this topic of fees, that there's one of the statements earlier on the consent agenda, one of the items was a financial report. And the statement was that there's just balances and that there's no cash flow. So I just have a hard time with the fact that we're going to go ahead and adopt a fee when we don't even know how much money we owe today, to whom, and then moving forward, how much money we owe to whom, and how that coincides with income coming in. Just seems difficult for me for a statement to be made on the same day that we're adopting a fee that we don't know what our cash flow statement is. Thank you.
Staff, is that a fair assessment that we don't know our cash flow? Could you please address that, if that's an accurate statement?
No, it's not an accurate statement. We have the cash flow in front of us, and I think it's been discussed at length in the past about why there's an importance for this fee and how we're going to run out of the money that was loaned to us by the Water District. And it appears that September is that period of time where we're going to run out of the Water District's loan money.
Advanced fees.
Advance, yeah, not
No
loan.
loan. No loan.
Okay, advance fees, I'm sorry.
All right, did anybody else want to, or anyone else want to address anything before we go on to Donna? Okay, Donna, please.
Okay. I didn't know whether to bring this up under 9 or 10. I don't know if it's in the ordinance. I do know it's in the data packet. And I didn't have it in front of me. But my question is, I think you should consider some other items under revenue. There is Proposition 1, grant administration, and it was on a chart in under support costs, and it refers to invoicing, processing invoices, and turning in reports and that sort of thing. So you will get reimbursed for your admin. So that reimbursement amount should be under revenue, I think. And I don't know the exact fee. I think this item was $103,000. So that's potential revenue coming in. Plus, in the PAC recommendations, we suggested requesting a 50% advance for the severe disadvantaged community portions of the grants. And that would bring in half of $646,000 as revenue. So how do you address comments that might be made at other meetings regarding expenses and revenue? Because that fits in with your fee.
Staff?
Sure, I'll try to respond the best I can. The table you're referring to are the additional costs the table that we put together. What we did for that particular item is put the amount of money in there to manage our side of the agreement with DWR on the grant funds. These are progress reports, invoices that go in, and coordinating with DWR, and that effort is not reimbursable by the grant. So that's why it's there, because while it has to be done to get the money, it's not reimbursable. On the second item, which had to do with the second item?
103,000.
No, that was the first item.
Oh, that was a half back.
Yeah, advance on
And the advance.
An advance, just for clarification, I know Bob may want to say something too, but we haven't got the grant yet, okay? We haven't even got the agreement done yet, so we can't apply for that money. There is a provision under the disadvantaged communities grant, the $646,000 you mentioned. There is a provision in there to allow you to request advance money that can only be applied to work tasks in that category. So while it is something that we're considering and something that we would consider doing, we certainly can't do it till we have the agreement in place and we're moving forward with DWR. And then the money that comes in can't be used for other things. It has to be used for that purpose. So that's definitely on the table.
Yeah, I would just like to ask about the agreement for the Prop 1 funding. There must be a provision in there for administrative costs. Usually in a budget agreement, there is a 10% to 15% administrative fee.
Are you talking about a fee that the DWR would charge, or a fee that we'd be allowed to recover?
That's what you would be recovering.
No, there is no provision in the agreement. I've read the agreement. There is no provision in the agreement for us to recover any administrative cost. It's only what's in the work plan for actual work. And if there is, we'd be happy to apply for it.
Yeah, I'd like to look at the agreement because I work with a group that is administering a grant from DWR for an integrated regional water management program of over $1 million. And there is a set amount for fiscal fee, fiscal agent administrative fee.
If you could pass that on to Steve, that way, I'm sure you've looked, but more information isn't going to hurt
Absolutely.
anybody.
Absolutely.
Bobby, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, while I agree and appreciate the PAC suggestion that we get an advance on the grant once we have our grant agreement done, and I agree we should look into.
Okay. Well, we've got a PAC house. Are they out there ready to set up?
Yeah, there's meetings at 3.
Well, they've come a long ways. I'm going to ask I'm sorry, TAC and PAC, you all, I think you are probably going to stay anyhow, but I would like to have them come in. We will resume the meeting after they're done. Does anybody have any objection?
What's happening?
We have, SkyTem is coming in to do their report.
So we're going to do closed session. Go back.
We will after that, yeah.
No, we can go back there now.
Yeah.
Closed session.
Okay.
Yes, so he can go.
And we'll continue on all this stuff?
We'll continue on the other stuff after,
Aren't you allowed to just table it to
after
another meeting?
SkyTem.
No?
No, we have PAC and TAC want some information. So I thank you all for coming. We don't have a quorum, folks, so we're going to adjourn the meeting, and we will